Monday, October the 4th, 1 o'clock. And I will call this meeting to order, and we'll do a roll call, make sure that all our technology is working. Councillor McCrae?
Here.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Here.
Councillor Kittredge?
Present.
Councillor McElwain?
Here.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
I'm here.
Councillor Foster?
Here.
We're all here and we can hear everyone, so that's great. First thing on our agenda is addendums, corrections to the agenda. So we have one addition. We have another delegation, which will go Sabine Mars, who is going to be speaking about East Mill. So we invite her. Welcome, Sabine. Any disclosure of pecuniary interests under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act from any of the councillors today? Okay, seeing none, I'll go right to delegations and I'll go right to Sabine. Welcome to our council meeting, Sabine.
Thank you. Thank you very much for letting me have an opportunity to speak to you. So I'm the owner of 11 East Mill and Allure Doggy Daycare. The reason that I wanted to speak today is I see that within the budget, the East Mill reconstruction is slated, I believe, for 2023. Is that correct currently? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Okay.
Dan, can you just give us a yes or no on that? Yeah, yes. Yeah, we got the thumbs up from our Managing Director of Infrastructure. Go ahead, Sabine.
Okay, so in the past 2 years, this building and some of my neighbors' properties have been adversely affected by 3 fairly significant water main breaks, one very significant. So May 2019, my building did have quite a bit of flooding. July the 30th of 2020 was very significant. It was the fire department had to come out to help us pump because the water was flowing so quickly through the building. And then we had another more minor one this past January, so January of 2021. I just wanted to point out and just make sure that you're aware of how significant this has been for myself and some of my neighbors, and that the damages have cost me significant out-of-pocket money, time, and really unnecessary stress during an already pretty challenging time as a small business owner. I just wanted to, just make my point that this has been a really big impact, a really negative impact for me. Not only the out-of-pocket costs, but also my insurance premium has increased because of this. And more concerning is that my deductible now for flood coverage increased from $2,500 to $10,000 as the deductible, and that's a direct result from these floods that have really been. I mean, they're water main breaks. They're not a natural occurrence. They're water main breaks. So OSTIC, or my insurance, Edge Mutual, they view the risk of reoccurrence as very high, and that's why they increased the coverage to $10,000. So when we had to do some repairs to the building last summer, it came to close to $10,000, which was then completely out of my pocket. I just want to make sure that this stays within the budget for 2023 and doesn't get pushed out further. I think at one point it was on for 2024, and I just want your council to be aware of the impact that this has had, and it is really stressful. If the temperature drops significantly, I really do live in fear that there's going to be another break in front of the building. So please keep it in place. Do whatever you can to be working with the county. I recognize that East Mill is municipal and county, but please do keep it at the front of your minds as you're making decisions around the budget, because it really has been very, very hard to deal with. I mean, I'm a taxpayer, I'm a business owner, and $10,000 for me, it's a significant amount of money to have to put out and to worry about having to put out again between now and then.
Thanks very much, Sabine. And I will give Colin an opportunity just to give you an update on what we're planning. I know this has been a priority for us to move this along, and we've had significant discussions with the county to move it along in their capital plan too, because I think it was considerably out into the future when our discussions with the county started. But I just want to, while you're on the line here, Sabine, I want to give Colin the opportunity to give you a little bit of update on this project and why he sees it as important. Colin?
Yeah. Thanks, Mayor Linton. So we've staff are recommending the project in 2023. So we've started preliminary design. We've done some geotechnical investigations, surveying along that stretch. So this is all preparation to get the design moving along. So obviously, the main driver is the water main replacement, but we do see this as an opportunity to improve. We've got some drainage issues that associated with just East Mill in general. If anyone who was down there during the storm a couple of weeks ago, there was quite a bit of flooding in there. So I think as we have the road dug up, we have an opportunity to address that. Also, with the sidewalks through there too, we've done some temporary fixes over the years just to improve the pedestrian experience through there. So there's an opportunity, I think, to really do a better job or improve the sidewalks through that area as well as part of this project. So all that is being looked at in detail now. So we'll be continuing our discussions with the county. So they are on board with moving it to 23 based on our discussions. So and at this stage, the township will be taking the lead on the design and getting the approvals together with the county as a partner on this project.
Thanks for that update, Colin. Thanks, Sabine, for your delegation. Appreciate you coming and spending time and giving us your thoughts on the importance of this project. Thank you. Our second delegation that we have is Paul Rappolt, a resident who has some questions, concerns with the capital budget. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you, Paul. Again, our delegations are a 10-minute maximum. Obviously, you don't have to use the full 10 minutes, but that is the maximum. So I will turn it over to you right now. Welcome, Paul.
Okay. Thank you very much. And thanks for hearing me. I sent a message with my proposal for getting on the agenda. I don't know if anyone received it, or was there any written work with my request for opportunity to speak?
Yes, it's on the agenda and it's been sent to all the councillors.
And has everyone read it so they know, kind of what I want to discuss?
You can assume that everybody's read it. We have good councillors here.
Okay. As your clerk said, you can lead a horse to water, but sometimes. Anyway, so what my concern is, the amount of money being spent on Bridge 24. And in light of so many other needs in the community, roads, as we've heard, social service, policing, safe bicycle routes, the immediate need to find routes for commuters north of the Grand River to get southeast and west, and of course, parking in Elora and Fergus. And I question if this project serves the needs of a large number of the taxpayers in our community. And I'm asking for a moratorium on it and the reallocation of funds to many of the pressing needs that we see in our community. First, I'd like to thank Council for the opportunity to speak here and thank them for the hard work they do on tough decisions that impact the interests of all our community members. Having said that, I don't agree with all the decisions that are made, but I recognize that you're trying to serve the interests of many, many people with varying views. I'm here asking you to pause and rethink the replacement of Bridge 24 on First Line, which heads north of the Bellwood Road. Bridge 24 is one of 3 bridges over the Irvine River in close succession. They're within about 200 yards of one another. Bridge 24 is closed. Bridge 23 has had some improvements to it, but still, I think, not wide enough for two-lane traffic to safely proceed. And the third bridge, Bridge 22, has been replaced. So it is about 2 kilometers north of the proposed exit from the industrial park that will come on to first line. And the majority of truck traffic will be heading south, and most traffic, I think, is generated locally and will continue to use Scotland and Gordon Street. As for local traffic using first line, I'm certain most of the residents south of Bridge 24 and many north of 24 are satisfied with it remaining closed. I find this a startling price to be allocating to such a minor road at a time when there's no comprehensive plan in place to alleviate the traffic congestion elsewhere in the region. I'm hoping that you'll seek further community input with councillors actively canvassing their constituents, then acting on their priorities. These are very large financial commitments, and I think we need to get it right. There's now in the area of flooding, yes, there is flooding in that area, but there's been road replacement and repair done. There's been culverts put in north of the bridge, between the bridges. And since that has been done, there's been no flooding over the road, back up in the fields, but no amount of fill or size of bridges will alleviate that problem. That is an issue that I think needs to be addressed by council with the GRCA. And I had a map here, which I was hoping I could give to people. It would be, I think, fairly easy to see a way to alleviate some of the flooding issues that we've experienced. As far as emergency services, people north of the first line of the bridge are certainly much more accessible at present than in many areas in Centre Wellington. If you come off Highway 6 on the Queen Mary, which I call it, or 15, you can access north of the bridge quite easily. So my hope is that you'll consider my recommendation seriously and suspend further expenditures on design and certainly the construction of this project. Please speak to the residents and develop a comprehensive transportation plan that will meet the needs of your constituents and our community. And having said that, if I have a moment, I filled out a form that was asking our input on a transportation future in the area and how bypasses might work. And I wonder if councillors have got feedback from our point of view and have taken that to heart in thinking how we can alleviate some of the transportation problems that we have within the community. And certainly getting commuters south of the river, south of the Grand River is a top priority, and I recognize that. I'm not sure that $4 million on a bridge on a minor road heading north is money well spent. So I'm interested if anyone would like to respond to me, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Paul. So community delegations, there isn't discussion with council at this time. It's just really for you to have an opportunity to bring your concerns and your thoughts to council for us to consider. So it's not beginning of a discussion at this point. As far as the one bridge that Paul is talking about, Colin, did you want to have a brief comment about why it's a priority? I mean, just to provide a little bit of an overview, we do have a comprehensive transportation plan. It's called the Centre Wellington Transportation Master Plan, and that goes to the year 2041. So that's a comprehensive plans for transportation needs across Centre Wellington. In addition, the County of Wellington is working on a roads master plan as well, a comprehensive transportation plan for the county as well. So there are two plans that we try to make sure that our projects align to. But maybe, Colin, you can provide your thoughts on the priorities for this bridge that Paul's talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Mary Linton. So this bridge has ranked as high priority in the township's asset management plan, and the main drivers for this one are emergency response times, responding to whether it's fire or a medical call. That kind of the north-south bridges in that quadrant of former West Gare Fraxa. The impact to emergency response times when those bridges are closed on the north-south roads is quite significant. So that's what's bumped some of these ones as a higher priority in terms of replacement. And I would also add that we've gone through a fairly extensive public consultation process. This structure went through an environmental assessment where we looked at various options, including permanent closure was actually looked at as one of the options through the class environmental assessment. And council did approve or endorse the recommended option, which was a replacement of the existing structure at the existing crossing location. So from staff's perspective, we're proceeding with the detailed design for that has progressed. It's well along its way, the detailed design with the plan. Again, subject to council approval of the budget to be issuing a tender for the construction early next year.
Thanks, Colin, for that update. And thanks, Paul, for coming to do your delegation today. I appreciate that very much. And we will go on with the agenda and just stay tuned. There will be a lot of information that comes out to the community about our budget process as we get further into it. Again, thanks, Paul, for being here at council. Moving on to section 5, presentations. So we have parking enforcement, and it's an information item for council's discussion today and just to receive this. And we have Derrick Snowdy from Alpha Parking Solutions going to give a report on our pilot project for downtown parking in 2021. Okay, so I heard he's having technical difficulties, so he's trying to join the meeting. Should we wait for him, Carrie, do you think, or should we go to the... Oh, here he comes, good. Are you gonna give any intro or no, just to hand it right over to him? Okay. Okay, so Derrick is just joining us right now. Okay, welcome, Derrick. I'll put the floor over to you and you can go through your report.
Good afternoon. Took a little bit for me to get technically set up. I had to update my computer and it wanted to restart the entire thing. So I understand that most of you had a copy of the latest memo that I sent over.
We do.
Okay. There are, it's pretty self-explanatory in terms of the broad strokes of what we experienced over the last couple of months. There's just a couple of singular issues that I thought I would bring to light to you. And also, I find that sometimes a back and forth discussion, if you will, is sometimes helpful in understanding the other issues or people have questions. I know that with a lot of times committee and council members essentially are supposed to be 5-minute experts in everything. They get a snapshot and then everybody expects them to have a huge base of knowledge around it. And we all know that that's just not practical. So first off, I want to tell you, it was actually quite a lovely community to work in. Wonderful people, wonderful location, and genuinely very nice place to be. So everyone, you know, even the atmosphere around business in the community is extremely positive. And we see a lot of that on the street, not only from residents and business people, but also from visitors and tourists coming into the community on a daily basis. So that's important for everybody to know. From an operation standpoint, when we first commenced, we had some original observations that became a work in progress with city staff. And those included areas of the town that don't have signage depicting regulations and rules for parking, predominantly along some of the streets and intersections near stop signs and so forth. A lot of times people don't understand the traffic safety issue that comes with that. And I made mention of the fact that when you have large SUVs or trucks that are quite common in the neighborhood, they stick back into the point where pedestrians have to circle around. We did see a very interesting dynamic in terms of ticket overall issuance. And we consider what we call the recidivism rate of, that's the vehicles that receive more than one ticket for the same infraction. And I think we see the number now in total, almost 2,000 tickets by the time we're done. That rate of multiple vehicle infractions was profoundly low. In fact, only 16 vehicles received more than one parking ticket, and only 3 of those vehicles received more than 2. So that's a pretty strong indicator that most of the targeted enforcement and most of the bylaw that was enforced was dealing with a non-residential side of this. This is people coming to the community, becoming familiar with it. We don't see that migration into the parking lots. Within the municipal lots, we took a look at the occupancy studies that we began in July and ran until the middle of August, looking at increases in vehicles that had attended the lot. Sorry, were you speaking there?
No, I was not.
Okay, sorry. So those were observations that we saw a high level of compliance within the community with those that became familiar. Plus, we did not see a return rate for multiple tickets that were issued in the vehicles for the same time period. So that, of course, factored into whether or not people essentially were learning and whether they followed the notifications. We did have a large percentage of people parking in the designated disabled parking spaces, which I'm fairly familiar with a number of municipalities. I've never seen such a high percentage based on that. However, as the time and the wore on, and people became aware that these were being enforced, that dropped off significantly. So that's part of the visibility aspect and people understanding that those rules or those bylaws are being enforced. Private property became, and you've probably seen me mention this a couple of times. I know Carrie and I have had some discussions about it. Private property became one of the largest interactions we had with members of the community. And I'm sure everybody understands, it's very reasonable to understand that as soon as you start applying the regulations around this, people will migrate to areas where there is least resistance. And in this particular case, moving on to certain private property areas to occupy parking where they either couldn't find it on the streets or were staying overtime past it. We didn't get that push up to the municipal lots from the vehicles. They simply would park on the private property side. So there was a lot of interaction with private property owners asking what they could do to stop people from parking on their property, on their business space, and leaving the property to attend to other business. We don't have a private property bylaw within the township, and there are no bylaws on the books that fit the definition of that type of situation. So I've referred that a couple of times, and Carrie and I have talked about that's something you might want to look at from the administrative side. From the operation side, we modified our patrol scheduling from the original schedule that we had scheduled or proposed. We learned from that. We pivoted about third week of July to focus on the peak period, which is the evenings, Thursday, Friday, and the daytime, Saturday and Sunday, which we have, as you're aware, a high number of volume of people coming and going. We took a look at the 3 major festivals that come through the area this year, and as you all know, some went online and some were not held. So we don't have any way of understanding the traffic impact to the community during those festivals. that was another part of trying to understand the scheduling and the manpower dynamic based on the volumes of people coming and going. There was a discussion. I know that Carrie may speak to it later, or she's had some experience with this. While we were out in the community, one of the other questions we received from the public, this is the parking public, not the resident or business public, was where they could pay for their parking. I know that's a sensitive issue with a lot of people. We do know that predominantly most of the people coming into the community are coming from the GT area. As a general rule, I'm going to make a statement that everybody can hold me to. We do know that as a general rule, parkers aren't comfortable with free parking. They don't trust it. People will tend to park even though they're told there's a complimentary parking or there's no charge. They won't trust it. They'll leave early, not taking the chance. Carrie and I on a couple of occasions were out when we were approached by people who it was difficult to reassure them that the parking was free. They doubled down and wanted to point out the vehicle and wanted to be sure of it. So as volumes of traffic increase, it might be something that you want to look at and consider from an availability side. There are some studies, and I can forward separate information to everyone related to what the impacts of that are. People tend to stay longer. They tend to dine longer, shop longer when they're comfortable that their vehicle is paid and secured. That goes for a number of communities that have experienced that. I think as we saw in this summer, Orangeville attempted or was looking at a pilot on their paid parking. I don't know what became of that, but it's definitely an attitude that's migrating north. We pivoted over to computer generated, handheld generated ticket issuance, which was able to provide some data for Carrie and for the report for you folks. We got a little bit granular on the types of offenses. Other than that, it's been a very measurable experience without some of the factors that we expected to see, such as the festivals and so forth. And traffic guidance wise, I took a look at the averages, and with the community increase growth, and I may mention this to everyone before, community's growing. You're adding vehicles and households to the community. Your streets aren't going to get wider and your parking lots aren't going to get bigger. You're just going to have more traffic in the neighborhood and in the community. And beyond where the boundaries and bylaws currently exist, for example, in the 3-hour limit, the rest of the streets surrounding require certain amounts of signage and other depictions related to the bylaws that are already on the books there.
Great, thanks very much, Derrick, for that report. As all of council is aware, this was identified as a pilot project. So at the end of a pilot project, you look at what worked and what didn't work and where we can make improvements. So I guess that's what this is all about. So I want to make sure that I provide an opportunity for each member of council to give their thoughts on what they've heard from residents and what they've heard from folks that have used their downtowns, and make sure that next year we improve on what we did this year based on feedback from the community. So I'm just going to go around the table and let me know what you've heard from your residents and some of your thoughts, starting with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. A number of things. Firstly, I want to point out I'm not hearing anything in this report that I think most people didn't already know. What I mean by that in particular, a lot of the problem is Thursday, Friday, Saturday, in Fergus in particular. I know it's maybe more widespread in Elora, but in Ward 3, it tends to be a Friday evening, Saturday problem primarily. I've also heard from a number of residents who observed, Derrick, your people out enforcing on an empty St. Andrew Street, and they've questioned me, why are parking enforcement people walking down St. Andrew Street past rows and rows of empty parking spots? So it begs the question, what did we accomplish? And those 2 points I think tie together. Most of the problem in Ward 3 is is Thursday, Friday evening, and a Saturday issue primarily. This is what I'm hearing. I still maintain that we could have accomplished most of this ourselves in-house. I'm not in favor of proceeding, at least in Fergus, with this. That's what I'm hearing from my residents, that we haven't accomplished much with the expense incurred.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks, Mayor, and through you. Yeah, I appreciate the report for sure. It's interesting to see and hear what kind of tickets and what kind of parking violations we have. I think that from the beginning, I've been sort of on the fence on this one. It's a lot of money to work on parking and offenses. I think that the BIAs have been struggling and dealing with this, and yet it's a project that I was willing to try. I will admit I have had received very, very little feedback from the residents. Very, very few people have commented on the bylaw enforcement downtown. So I can't really bring much to the table in that regard. I'd love to hear and actually receive something back from the BIAs that speak directly towards how it's affected them directly for this, because that'll give us a better understanding as is this effective, because it's been pretty quiet in regards to the residents. Thanks.
A couple good points, Councillor Van Leeuwen. Both BIAs supported this as a pilot project when it went ahead, but now we definitely have to double back to both BIAs, and now that we've done a year of it, and get their thoughts. So that's definitely on the agenda for sure. Councillor McWayne.
Thank you. Yeah, I have had very mixed response from the Elora BIA. It's semi-successful, but there was still a lot of people that go out and erase the chalk mark off their tire, or just wait until there's an opening and then just move their car 2 car lengths, and et cetera, et cetera. It's not solving the problem that paid parking would solve. From a very personal point of view, I hate it, because I've been, for the last 5 weeks, repairing monsters down in the green space. I need access to my car because that's where I carry all the repair stuff. And I'm trying to remove a car every 3 hours so that I can have access to it. I missed by 15 minutes the other night, and so I got a $35 ticket, $45 ticket, unless I pay it early, and then it's $35, which, by the way, I thought was a $20 ticket at the beginning. So I was really surprised to get a $35 ticket. I've heard a lot of comments back from some of the store owners who say we're leaving a really sour taste in people's mouths because they're leaving Elora with a $35 charge for, after shopping here and or eating here or touring the gorge. So I'm not in favor. As you pointed out, Derrick, I think people would much prefer to be able to pay a small hourly amount and put a ticket in their window for 5 hours or 6 hours or all day. And that the local storekeepers aren't going to do that on a daily basis. They can't afford to do that on a daily basis. So you're solving the problem of people parking in front of their own business and giving people the option of staying more than 3 hours, because right now it's just not enough time for people to shop and eat. And that's the feedback I'm getting.
Councillor Kitchers.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Derrick, for this report. I just have a few questions. I don't know whether you can answer them.
I can't answer them. I'll get back to you with an answer. How's that?
Okay, that sounds good.
Sounds good.
In the summary of the violations, there wasn't a categorizing between Fergus and Elora. So I kind of would like to know where the violations are. Like, is it like 50-50 each town, or 80-20, or so that was it. And the other thing is, there were 2 employees that did, I would say 96% of the ticketing. And so I'm just wondering, was that because of their shift, or are they just keeners and everyone else is slackers? You know? So I just sort of have those questions. I do appreciate you saying about paid parking and the length of stay, but the other thing is that this cost over $100,000 and we raised $61,000. So I'm just sort of wondering about the financial parts of it. And just as we tweak and have the conversation about this with more, I do appreciate you giving this data and narrowing down, but it's the kind of stuff where then you can really tweak it and really understand where the needs are and make decisions accordingly. So if you could just answer that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Sure. So the bylaw is, of course, a Township of Wellington Center bylaw, and on the tickets themselves, that's the designated municipality in which the offense code is issued. So they aren't differentiated by either Elora or Fergus for the sake of how that works. We would actually have to go back into each ticket, find the street address, and compare it to either Elora or Fergus to decide that. That's just the way the bylaw itself is set up. We could do that if the metrics became critical to your thinking. I could go back through that summary wise and correlate them to streets in each of the towns and produce a total for that. I don't know what that time would be, but I can ask my admin guy in the office about that. As far as staffing goes, in order to complete, and I know there was a conversation about whether it could be done internally, when you're dealing with a scheduled crossover, we also have two people on at a certain amount of time. There's, if you can think of them like a scheduling Venn diagram with that intersection. Of the 4 officers in the township this summer, primarily 2 did the peak period volume shifting and scheduling. I focused on warnings for things that we didn't have designated bylaws for, and we were looking for tools to deal with traffic management. There were hundreds and hundreds of warnings issued in what we call the warm-up phase. So when it goes back to sort of a revenue standpoint, I believe that if we'd had tickets issued from the get-go without that warning phase, you would be already closer to your budgetary number. I'll have to talk to Carrie about this. I am very sure we're not over $100,000. In fact, I think we're under that. I will double check. So I'm not sure where that, I don't have any transparency to where that number's coming from in terms of what was spent, but I believe we're under that significantly. Okay. Oh, and with respect to the issue regarding staffing, for example, if you're going to have a full-time person doing this, you not only require sort of an internal staffer, but you also require 1.8 employees to do it. You're dealing with issues related to staffing, vacations, sick days, any sort of coverages off schedule. So it's not a single individual position when you're talking about the hours that are on demand.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, first off, Derrick, let me say this. I was in Elora a few weeks back and witnessed an interaction between one of your staff and a tourist that had deliberately parked in a handicapped spot. And when saw your employee approach, it got a little heated. And I commend you and your staff on how calm that man remained. And the gentleman walked away and just scoffed at him. And I watched as he placed the ticket on there. So no escalation, just the calm demeanor. And so I can understand that you put some training into these people. So I appreciate that. As far as feedback from the BIA, I've talked to the BIA several times over this. I'll ask them for an official letter so that council can have that and get their opinion on it. But the downtown Fergus businesses have been telling me they're no longer having the conversations with people inside the store that there's no place to park, and the frustration level of customers seems to be down. So they're very positive comments when it comes to shopping downtown Fergus with the parking enforcement and keeping the people moving every 3 hours or so. So from that standpoint, I think it was kind of successful. I share the concerns when it comes to the cost, and I believe that's because this is a county county jurisdiction, and they're getting the revenue from this, I think, are they? And we're paying the expenses. So that's something I think we need to address and to fix between the county and the township of Center Wellington. If we're going to be paying this, we should certainly see our fair share of revenue. So those are my only comments.
Thank you. We do take a lot of time to deal with confrontation. A lot of my officers, we work in up to 8 different municipalities at any given time. Parking is a highly confrontational situation. So we got a fair amount of experience trying to bring it back down. It's not 100% successful, but we do our best.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Derrick, for your report. One question I have is, have you provided a list of streets missing needed signage to staff?
I can tell you we provided some. It is an ongoing work in progress. We know that there's only so many people and so many signs, and the ability to get things matched up with bylaws that are on the books as a sort of a side project to the enforcement side. Our officers have been making notes of occupancy, streets that we should be prioritized. We have what we call a wrap-up part of the project where we're going to be spending a day making note of the critical areas to be signed. I did meet with staff a few times during the summer about this. We did get signs up in some locations. Others, because there are bylaws specific to streets, we need to do sort of mine a little deeper into what bylaws had applied. There are places where some streets where the bylaws don't apply because they're not on the schedule, looking to add those in through the schedule side. There was a comment made with respect to why an officer would walk down a particular street. I believe it was St. Andrew Street when there was no vehicles parked. Parking enforcement isn't a selective enforcement process. We don't pick and choose when the law is applied against who. You don't sit there in a predatory action on a corner waiting to pounce on someone. There are patrol patterns and patrol routes that are done for a very specific reason. It gives a level playing field, transparency to the process. So during a pilot project especially, we adhere to patrol routes and schedules in order to make a universal application of enforcement with the same mentality at each location. So long answer to your short question. It's a work in progress. We do have some streets listed and there will be more coming.
Thank you, because I'd say the majority of the complaints I received, which I forwarded on to staff, were related to the lack of signage on certain areas that people were being ticketed and didn't know why and found out after the fact. So it'll be important for us to try and close those gaps in the public's knowledge. Another thing I received was some concerns about some conflicting signage that was in place, which suggested one thing, but they got ticketed for another. Staff are aware of that particular one. Another complaint I got was from residents who live in the downtown above the commercial areas who are asking that we consider having parking passes or reserved parking in the public parking lots where they can store their cars so they don't have to worry about the 3-hour parking turnaround. I heard mixed comments about the parking turnover rates of 3 hours. Some people found that they were great. Others said that outsiders were complaining it was too short a time period. I also heard a recommendation that we should switch to paid parking, that they thought that might be better in terms of appeasing people who want to stay longer than the 3-hour period. So that's sort of what I have to share.
So everyone's aware in Ontario, the standard on-street parking windows are predominantly 3 hours in all the major areas. That's the usual and customary amount of time. And I think that's where the baseline was set up for this. Oh, there was a comment earlier, and I forget who, if you'll pardon me, I forget who mentioned it with respect to a ticket being $35 over 20. During this project, the clerk and the attorney general made the formal changes to the schedule, and the updated schedule was put into effect with respect to violations. I think that came into place. We received it from the attorney general's office 3rd week of July, I believe is when that filed. And Carrie might be able to give me or speak to that a little more accurately on the date.
Carrie, do you want to speak to that, or?
Sorry, no, not necessarily through you. Derrick's absolutely right. We did, there was some delay in the approval process, but the set fines were changed specifically for the 3 hours. We do wish to review the entire set fine schedule and update it.
But just to clarify though, Carrie and Derrick, council does not play a role in this, in what those fines are, do they?
No, they did not. We do have an agreement with the County of Wellington. So when we were doing the set fines, in order to have everything done in accordance with the time frame for the pilot, we just went with changing the set fines for the new 3 hour. We didn't review the entire schedule due to time.
Okay, thanks for councillors for those thoughts. A couple of things that came up that I wanted to just mention quickly. As far as the county receiving the money for these fines, that is something we absolutely have to change. The county is aware of that, and so as we go forward, that's something. If we're going to be spending this type of money to do parking enforcement, we need to get these revenues back. So that is something that is in process right now, and we recognize that. So as you can see from what Derrick has presented, there are a number of improvements that will have to be made, and they'll come into kind of a changed policy related to parking, and these will be what we bring to the BIAs to get their thoughts on and get their feedback based on still a little bit of a weird year, but we still want to make changes as we go and make this improve this for as many people as possible. As you can imagine, this is why it was difficult to do anything in parking, and why nothing was done for so many years is because there's so many different opinions and so many different thoughts and so many different ways that we could do and not do parking. So we wanted to move ahead with something and then improve it. So thanks to Derrick and your team for doing this pilot with us. We do want to make sure we make improvements next year, and we wanted to get the feedback of the BIAs. We also want to get the feedback from citizens, because that's important. You know, paid parking might sound like a great idea for visitors and for people downtown, but I'm not sure that locals are going to love that idea, and the downtowns are also belong to the local people that live here. So I would like us to make sure that we engage them as far as what they would like to see in our downtown. So that's the kind of work that we have to do to make sure that next year we can make improvements on this program. But again, going back to the reason that we did is we wanted to get turnover in our downtowns. And I think one of the things that we did here is we did get turnover, and that's what we were pushing for. And we wanted to make sure that those folks that were staying on the streets for 8, 7, 8, 9 hours and taking customer parking spots weren't doing that. And so that's what we were trying to address. And I think we did that to some degree, but there's some other impacts that we might have to clean up as well. So thanks, Derrick. Thanks for bringing this report, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks very much. As a final thing I wanted to mention, at the beginning of this project, I had a small wager with my staff on how many tickets we would issue for a particular offense. It was related to the EV charging stations in the community. And we typically see a lot of abuse of those in the GTA, Brampton, Toronto, Mississauga, Richmond Hill. And I was pleasantly the loser of that bet. We didn't issue a single ticket in the entire time for the bylaw related to the EV charging stations in your parking lots. The rules, the charging regulations were adhered to very well. And I got to tell you, I was pleasantly surprised that not a single ticket had been issued. So definitely a nice group of people rolling through the community, respecting that side of it. Final comment from me on, I know there are some residences above the businesses in the downtown that have talked about permitted parking issues. I did speak to Satnam and Carrie at the time related to this, and some of the things that'll need to be considered. I know Carrie will get back to you folks with some of this, but when allowing, you're essentially transitioning those community lots or public lots into private parking. So there becomes issues related to permitting, insurance. If somebody's got a van with caustic chemicals or a vehicle that becomes unplated, my history in this has shown me that making sure that the regulatory side of that keeps you safe from the legal aspect. So fair enough. If anybody has any other questions or things come to mind, please feel free to email me. I will get back to you with any particular information that I can and make sure that your questions are answered.
Great, thanks very much, Derrick. Really appreciate your report and your answers to the questions that we had today. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Moving on to consideration of reports, our 2022 preliminary capital forecast, and at this point, I will turn over. Boy, it's a tough crowd here. You say the wrong thing and the clerk mutes you. I'm going to turn it over at this point to our Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurers, Dan Wilson, to go through the preliminary capital forecast 22 to 31. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. As Council is aware, this is our third pre-budget meeting with respect to the 2022 budget. We had our first meeting in June where Council provided preliminary direction on the budget. We had our second meeting in early September where we focused in on the 2022 capital budget. And with this third meeting, we're more or less addressing the rest of the capital forecast as well as the staffing strategy, which is a report that we'll talk about after this one. So I just would like to note that we are still showing the 2022 capital items in this report. But nothing has changed at this point. It remains the same capital list as discussed at the September 7th pre-budget meeting. So we were hoping to more or less focus on years two and three being the pre-approval years and 4 onward as the rest of the capital forecast. Also, I'd like to point out that these pre-budget meetings are very useful to staff in that we are still planning on having the 2022 budget book available to Council by mid to late November. And these reports or these meetings do provide critical input in our development of that budget book. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to Mark, who will walk us through the capital forecast as well as the question and answer period.
Okay, thank you, Dan. So Dan, if you want to share your screen, and in the meantime, I'll just give you a little bit of background. So as Dan mentioned, 2022, we've already discussed, and we are, through the budget process, we look for pre-approval for planning purposes for the second and third year, so 2023 and 2024. I will mention, as in the past few years, the years 1 to 9 in the budget, so 2022 to 2030, are all fully funded based on anticipated future funding. I should also mention that this 10-year capital forecast does exclude the vehicle and equipment replacement info, as we're still working on those life cycle schedules, but those will be included with the final budget or the draft budget book that, as Dan mentioned, will be released in mid-November. And the 10th year is not fully funded. I think there's about $134 million worth of projects in that year. The main reason that we do still put them all those projects in year 10 is we just don't want to lose track of them. A number of those projects that are in that 10th year are actually coming out of the development charge background study that was approved by council earlier in the year. So there are no project, like all the projects are not numbered numerically. I think the best thing to do as we go through this is refer to the project name and then the number there that's just to the left of it. You'll see it is in a numerical order by section. So hopefully everybody will be able to find the project. So thought is that we go through this in sections just like we did with the 2022 budget back on September 7th. We do have a few projects that staff wanted or wish to speak to as we go through this. So I will highlight those and allow the managing director to speak to the project as we get to the various sections. So with that, I think I'll just open it up and ask if there's any questions on any of the study projects that are listed there.
Just to clarify then, Mark and Dan, we're focusing on 23 and after, right? Not 22, because we have talked about that already, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Just gonna have to make you all bigger here so I see things. And the first thing that we're talking about is studies?
Is studies, correct.
Okay, any questions of clarification on the studies? Councillor McElwain.
Thank you, Mayor. This one is actually not in 23 or 22, but we received an email from a citizen asking about the update to the growth strategy, which is a line item that's been there since 2013. And I did some looking back, and I just wanted to get some clarification myself on that one. After he highlighted it, I thought, you know, that there are some questions there. So just going back over the years, it used to be 186,000, and it used to be scheduled for 2021. It's now 110,000 in 2026. So I'm assuming, and I just need clarification, or just wanted clarification, that the $85,000 difference, $86,000 difference, actually went down to 100,000 for a couple of years. So it was an $86,000 difference. Has to do with the Stantec study that was done in 2015, 2016. And so that was just deducted from it. Is that a valid assumption? I'm not sure who answers that.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to answer that one, or do I send that right to Brett?
I think that one will need to be directed to Brett because that's where the costing would have come from.
Okay. Brett, can you take that question? You're still muted, Brett.
Don't know the details of the budget numbers in and out, and I think that we would have had a growth strategy project in prior years based on the number that it's got coded as 2013. I think that will relate to a previous development charges background study. And we likely would have had a budget estimate then, which would be the account that we would have used for the Stantec project. And then a number of years later, we would have had an update. And that's why over time, the second project or the update, when we more recently did our development charges background study, we would have reduced the cost of the subsequent study. And we put it in the year 2026, just because what really the current, we're not going to know what the growth forecast, the intensification targets, our population forecasts until the county's done the MCR, and it's due to be done in 2022, but I think it's a difficult timing to meet, and there could be appeals and other things that go on afterwards. So we've allowed for lots of time for us to get going on a growth strategy update, or even a new growth strategy, if you will, when the MCR is complete. So we've allowed a little bit of a gap in there. we can look at the numbers in and out and go back in the history of the original project and where this 2013 project number came from. But that's the best answer I can give right at the moment.
And just for those watching, MCR means Municipal Comprehensive Review. Councillor McElwain, follow on?
Yes, thank you. I don't understand, Brett, how the development review directly relates to growth strategy. Could you explain that to me, please? I have another question after, but I just wanted to clarify your statement on that.
I think I was talking about the development charges bylaw. So because a growth strategy would be a project that would be growth related, then it's funded by our development charges. So what I was suggesting that in a prior development charges study is when we would have identified that project 2013 number. And the municipal comprehensive review that the county is doing is where our growth forecasts and intensification targets are going to come from, if that was part of your concern.
Councillor McElwain?
Just the other follow, I'm still trying to understand that because growth strategy to me is separate from development charges, but I'm just really disappointed to see it out in 2026. We have a growth strategy committee, and seeing it out that far in advance is actually fairly disappointing. It's something that we should have in 2022, not 2026. So that's just my comment on that. I just also wanted to ask a quick question though about the conservation districts. There's 10 entries there for the HCDs. And do we know which area is being considered for each of those years? Because the prices changed throughout the 10 years, and I just wondered if there's a reason. Do we know which areas are being identified for each of those 10 years?
Brett?
Thank you, through your Mayor Linton. There's at least, I think, 6 different ultimate in the study, the CHL study. There's at least 6 different cultural or heritage studies or heritage conservation district studies that have been identified. And there's a process that the Heritage Committee will go through to try to refine what's the prioritization. But I think, so what we've done is starting in 2023, there's a study 1 year, then the plan the next, then another study, then the plan, then another study, then the plan. So, and we filled up the 10-year forecast with that so far. Victoria Crescent is in there, Union Street's in there, and Churchill Crescent in Fergus is in there as one of the plans. So before we move forward to the final budget, the Heritage Committee will be discussing sort of the ultimate prioritization that it would like to put forward for those plans. They have different land areas, so the budget's not the same for each. And because the downtown cores are the more costly ones, those are kind of at the end. But the different neighborhoods are smaller amounts.
Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess this one is for Brett. The update on the growth strategy. Is there a growth strategy? Like, I haven't seen that. And I'm just wondering, do we have a growth strategy? It says 2013 there. Because you need a strategy to update the strategy. So do we have a strategy at the present time in Center Wellington? And wouldn't having a strategy be our contribution to the MCR? Because they would want to know what our growth strategy is so they can do their strategy. It appears that because all the rest of the master studies would rely on the growth strategy, having the policy there. And when you said the development charges, well, that's a totally different study, like than the growth, is it not? So do we have a growth strategy plan?
We created several years prior in prior budgets, we created a growth strategy project. And now this project is an update to the growth strategy. We started on the growth strategy back in 2016, 2017. The last presentation to council was in 2017, was a preferred option report. And that is exactly when the province landed with the new growth plan that was going to double our density targets and double our intensification targets. So we put the brakes on that growth strategy at that time. And really ever since then, we've been in flux as to what our growth targets are, our population forecasts. And in answer to your question about the relationship to the NCR, unfortunately, it's a top-down process. And the province allocates growth to the county. The county then allocates growth to us. And it's through the county MCR that they set the future density targets and intensification targets. So it's very difficult for the township to complete any kind of a growth strategy. And I tend to agree, the language we may need to change here because it's updating a growth strategy that we never completed. So it's a new growth strategy. We're going to have new growth forecasts that go all the way to 2051. We're going to have new employment forecasts. The county's asked for a reduction in the intensification target that can only be done in an MCR. So we really can't complete our own growth strategy until the county gets its MCR done. And that is, as I say, it's due to be done in 2022. And we talked about at the staff level whether this one should be moved forward, but we've timed it so that we can move it forward if we know that we can move it forward once the dust has settled on the MCR, if you will. It's a lengthy process that the county has to go through. But the challenge is that in the latest version of the growth plan, the province has changed the way forecasting of population and land needs are done. They've changed the definition of what's employment land. They've changed the way the greenfield density target is calculated. And that's why it's the staff opinion and staff recommendation that we can't really complete a growth strategy until that work is done and we know what numbers we have to work with.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Brett. Mayor, Brett, my question is for Brett. Brett, you've told us there was the I'm referring to the same item, by the way. You've referred to the development charges review way back when as the basis for updating the growth strategy, and I know the line item 2013. That means that's 8 years ago. That's been in our capital budget. 8 years ago, we were going to update a strategies, and I'm hearing a kind of a circular argument that we're updating something that we never actually had. How do we update a strategy that we never actually had or was never formally passed by council? How do we update something that doesn't exist?
So Brett, what you've told us so far is that we were in the middle of doing our growth strategy and we were almost completed it, and then the province changed the rules. And so we didn't want to approve something that was already out of date before we even.
Point of order, Mayor.
No, there's
Point
no
of
point
order?
of order. I'm explaining because he's already answered your question. So I'm explaining what I've already heard, and I'm going to get Brett to clarify that that's exactly what he said already. And that's what I heard, Brett. You can fill in any details, but the rules have changed before we officially approve the strategic growth plan, and so now we have to wait until we get the counties finish their MCR review, so we know what kind of numbers to put into our growth plan. Is that accurate, Brett?
That is accurate, and I think the conversation or the point I raised about the development charges is simply that the date, the 2013 number that's attached here, would have related to a development charges study that we did, wherein the growth strategy was identified as one of the growth related studies that is funded by development charges. And that's where that code number and reference came from that will have been carried forward in previous budgets. And we can go back and look at the history of that. But I agree with Councillor Kittredge and Foster have both raised a very good point. We can't update something that we don't have in place in the first place. So we will take that comment that maybe this project shouldn't be called update to the growth strategy. Maybe it should just be called growth strategy. And I agree with that.
Councillor Dunsmore?
So the province sets the strategy, goes down to the county, and then we're left to deal with it at the bottom end. So that's what we're getting into a circular argument about. So my question is to you, Your Worship. Being the county warden, where are they in the NCR, and when do we expect that our staff will receive that information?
Yeah, that is a question for Brett. Thanks for giving it to me, but that's a question for Brett. They're working very closely with the townships, the different member municipalities, so he'd be better able to answer that question than I will be. Brett?
Well, I think council should be aware that the county had a consultation session back in June of this year saying where they are at with draft forecasts and all the work that's been done to date. I know they're at the stage of the game where, unfortunately, they're working largely with the province at this point in time because they're seeking clarity on the rules. As I mentioned, there's different methodologies that the province has put forward for how the growth forecasts are to be allocated. The employment forecast the definition of employment is a little bit different this time around. I know right now they're going through a process whereby lands that are designated for employment, the municipalities or private landowners have been given the opportunity to ask if they wish their land to be considered as being changed from employment to not employment, or could be residential or commercial use, but not specifically an industrial or employment use. And that has a role in how the land needs are determined. And so that part is what's going on right now before they move to the next stage. So I would encourage any member of council to keep up to date with the county's website. They've called this project Plan Well, and all the public consultation documents are all being posted there. I know there was an update recently to County Planning Committee as well on where things are at.
Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Mary Lynn. If I could just switch topics. Could Rashid provide us with a bit more of a background into the township-wide job evaluation study scheduled for 2024?
Rashid?
Well, thank you, Councillor McCrae, and through you, Mayor Linton. So that's our job evaluation, I think every 4 years, maybe Andy can nod, 5. Every 5 years we go to keep our jobs updated, and evaluation is done by our third party consultant, and we make sure that we are catching up to the market. And is there a specific question, concern there, Councillor McCrae?
I was just thinking more for the general public. I mean, I have an HR background, but just for people to understand that, periodically one does go back and review all the job descriptions, update them because jobs change, technology changes. So you're trying to capture the changes, as well as, comparing that that market-wise, the associated labor charges that go with it are, compared to other areas as well. So going to market to ensure that we're fair in what we're coming up with. So I think it's just more for people to understand that process.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you want to stay current with the market so that you can attract staff to bid for these positions, and we do not lag behind, or we need to be competitive in this competitive market. So these are pretty normal reviews every 4, 5, 3 years. Some organizations go every 3-year reviews. We have chosen 5 years period, so that's what just keeps us updated. Yeah.
Any other questions, Council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is for Brett Salmon again. Brett, it appears that council has never formally passed a growth strategy. So that ultimately that means for almost 10 years, we've never had a growth strategy. Can you help me understand then how we're proposing to spend $2.6 million on various other studies, all of which roll up to the important issue of growth in this community, when in fact we have never had a growth strategy passed by this council?
Yeah, that's not a question for Brett. I'll let Andy answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you, Brett has answered that question. We were working on a growth strategy. We were under the process. We had public meetings, we had a committee, and we also had reports to council. During that process, near the end, the province changed the rules and regulations. And as part of that change in rules and regulations, it requires the county to complete the MCR in order for us to plan for the growth as we move forward. The province sets the regulations, the county does the oversight countywide, and then we follow suit in looking at how we plan our growth to meet those standards and regulations. We will be working with the county, as Brett had mentioned. So council did see some. We did actually have councillors sitting on that advisory committee, and we did have a couple of public meetings. However, it was not a final growth strategy because the rules did change by the province.
Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. Brett, I was wondering if we're waiting for the MCR, and you're saying that they're moving along, when is the suspected date for that? And is the 2026 perhaps too far in the future, since we don't have a growth strategy? So perhaps we should do it earlier. And I'm just wondering, did you say that that was flexible and that we could move it earlier? And I'm just wondering, what is your preferred timeline for that?
Brett?
Thank you, Mayor Linton, through you. What I'd like to say that, again, we put it in 2026 to make sure that we allowed lots of time for the county MCR process to play out. If you recall, when we did get working on our prior growth strategy, one of the dilemmas we faced is that the county had adopted growth forecasts, I think in 2014 or 15. We started on our own growth strategy shortly thereafter, only to find that the county growth forecasts were tied up in appeal process. So where we had the objective of wanting our growth forecast to go all the way out to 2041, in the early days, we only had certainty of what the forecasts were out to 2031. And so that's the reason why I'm reluctant to say that we're going to put it in a certain year if we're not able to get it started. Certainly, it would be preferable if the county's MCR is done and we can move it forward. But I think it's important to clarify here. There's no legislative requirement for a growth strategy. The legislative requirement, or that's met, is the County of Wellington are the body that has really the legislated responsibility, and the growth strategy is embodied in their plan, and that's what the MCR ends up with. Our rationale for having a growth strategy of our own is try to marry the infrastructure needs, and we also want to have a little bit more flexibility in applying the county's the method that the county used to designate and allocate the density targets within our own community were the main reasons why we were looking at it. If you remember, we had a number of people that thought there were some important infrastructure studies, like the transportation master plan, the water supply master plan, that should be done. And now if you look at the budget, we also have a water and wastewater servicing plan. And I think in 2021, we funded a stormwater master plan. All of those individual master plan reports will play a role in our growth strategy, because the main purpose of the growth strategy really to look at the timing of growth and allocating where the growth occurs and in what order. So I think we need those studies to be done, and we need the county MCR to be done. If we can move it forward from 2026, I think that will be a good thing. We may find that when those other studies are done and the MCR is done, that we have less work to do. And this project can have a lower budget number and can be done sooner.
Councilor McElwain?
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's two aspects of the growth strategy. We can have a growth strategy, which is a strategic document, versus knowing all of the numbers and having it as an operational document. If we wait for the province and the county and whoever else to finish their numbers, we could be here forever waiting to do our growth strategy, because the provincial government's going to change in another year, or could possibly change in another year. All of those numbers could change again. So we can't keep putting things off forever. We can do the basics. I mean, we have urban design guidelines that have never been completed yet. We have the studies you just mentioned. There's all kinds of aspects to a growth strategy that we should be having come together as a base to work on, and add the operational aspects of the actual numbers as they come forward. And we should always be able to adjust our growth strategy based upon new numbers. Waiting until 2026 is just, we're leaving ourselves with nothing to work with. I mean, it doesn't seem to make sense as a strategic direction for the township.
Councilor Kittress?
Thank you, Mayor. I have to agree with Councillor McElwain about that. And also Councillor Foster about the explanation that we've been given that we need to wait for the county to be able to do the growth strategy is actually reversed, because almost all the other studies that were asked to okay for all these other years will depend upon the growth strategy. And we should have our own growth strategy, so that when we're in the conversation with the county, we have that input into them. It appears that we've decided to be laissez-faire, to let the market or whoever is the developer in our community to be the driver of the growth policy. And that, I think, is a recipe for poor management of municipality, because we need to have the growth strategy. I thought that the strategic plan we had for the Healthy Growth Committee would be coming up with this growth strategy, and it's now 3 years close to it. And we've actually changed the terms of reference in the growth strategy so that it's housing, attainable housing. And so I think that we should get a growth strategy put together And I think that's almost immediate. I think that we should change this in the budget so that we do develop a growth strategy, and we get this on track for our community. I think this is the most important issue because all the other studies, it's like looking in the rearview mirror, and after the fact, you're making all the other studies, but you haven't looked forward to develop your own strategy. And so I'm for changing the timeline of that and not waiting for the county. Having our strategy from what we know, we can put in positive input. Since we are, really, it appears that we are the area of growth for the county. Like we are a large portion of what's going to happen and where they're going to delegate. So we should have a say into that. That's just my views.
I just want to clarify a couple things. Just want to make sure we're accurate when we make comments. Healthy Growth Advisory Committee terms of reference did not change. The only thing that changed is that the Healthy Growth Advisory Committee decided that the most urgent need facing Center Wellington right now is attainable housing, and they'd like to focus the next few months on that. But it didn't change the terms of reference. The terms of reference for that committee stays the same. It's to provide recommendations to council on everything related to healthy growth within our town. So just wanted to clarify that. The other thing I wanted to clarify is that the MCR that the county is working on is very much including the Township of Center Wellington's involvement. It's not like the county's off doing their own thing without our thoughts, and our staff are very involved in that process. So we're really getting into some details about this, and I don't even know that we all are on the same page as to what a study like this, a growth strategy actually accomplishes. I think we're talking about a few different things at the same time and just wrapping it around in a few words. And I think that's not the great way to make decisions like this. We're getting into a lot of detail here. And if we want to move this up, that's a direction that council needs. But we're talking about some detail here that I'm not sure as councillors we have the expertise to be talking in this detail about. Any final comments on this one, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. You've just hit the nail on the head. There's been a line item in the last 3 budgets called updating a growth strategy, and yet we're finding out there isn't one to update, or we're updating some spurious document that never existed in the first place and was never passed by council. Andy, you really didn't answer my question. My question was simple. Which growth strategy document was there, and why has it been that for 10 years we've been operating without one? You advised this morning via email to a citizen who asked for a copy that there isn't one to circulate, and yet here we are updating that very document that doesn't exist. Clearly, we don't even have a growth strategy.
Answer this. This is the 4th time you've asked the same question. It's pretty clear.
Maybe I'll get an answer this.
You got an answer all 4 times, so you're not going to get an answer again. As was clarified several times already, we had a draft document that was not approved by council because the rules changed. I don't know what else you want on that. So a lot of work was done, a ton of work was done by our staff and council and the committee back then about developing a growth strategy, and we didn't finalize it because of changes the province made. I don't know what else you need from that, Councillor Foster. We'll be building on the work that was done and building it with the county, with the process they're going through.
We're going to update a document that
Councillor
never
Kitchers.
existed.
Thank you, Mayor. I have to say that your comment that we don't understand growth is out of line. As a businessman, I understand growth very well. I make plans for growth. And I make strategic plans in the future for the growth of my company, and then everything falls into place from the growth plan. And so I do know what I'm talking about, very much so. And the success of my businesses is a testament that I do know, and that this would be any different for a government to not want to have a strategic plan earlier. So I would suggest, and I've made it, I've tried to say it very nicely, that we reprioritize and have the strategic growth plan strategy done earlier. And so I'd like to make that recommendation.
Okay, yeah, so make that recommendation a little bit more clearly. When would you put that up? Put it up by 1 year, 2 years? What's your motion? You're still muted.
I would recommend that we do it as soon as possible, because all the other master plans and studies, even the staffing plan, which we're going to be discussing later, stipulates because of growth, but it doesn't have an it follows through from the growth strategy. So I would suggest that we do it as soon as possible.
So your motion is that we do the growth plan as soon as possible. Can I get a seconder for that motion? Councillor Foster, any discussion on that motion? Councillor Foster, is it going to be new? Go ahead.
I'd like to propose a friendly amendment, Councillor Kittredge, that we do it in 2022. To be specific.
Okay, that's fine.
Second.
So we have a mover and a seconder to move up the growth strategy to 2022. So I hope that you councillors are prepared to move other things out then. Okay, all in favor? Opposed? And that fails. Anything else related to studies? Okay, Mark, go on to the next section.
Okay, Dan, if you can share your screen again, please. So the next section is corporate. So we'll lump in there both corporate IT&S and corporate other. If there's any question on any of those line items.
Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Yeah, I'd like to discuss the termite management program. And I've been doing some research related to what Dr. Miles was doing, and also following a product that's been on the market in the US for 24 years and has received more than 70 independent articles proving that it eliminates termite colonies. So I've been looking at the numbers of what it costs to use that product in the US related to the 480 properties that Dr. Miles identified as needing to be treated. And I feel that the 60,000 that we have identified for 4 years is not sufficient to do what we hope to do. And what I'd like to do is recommend that staff review the possibility of increasing the amount per year. I'm suggesting we look at starting at 100,000 and look at extending it out for at least 12 years if we really want to address controlling termites in our community. I've been receiving concerns from residents who have been diligently treating their properties over the years, doing the annual inspections, using a product called Ultraset, and discovering that it's not effective. So these people need help, because as we see our properties going up in value and people's mortgage costs going up, their ability to cover the cost of termite treatment is becoming tougher. So what I'm suggesting is let's consider doing something more significant that's really going to address termites in our community.
Councillor McCray, so I just want to understand what you're saying. Is that chemical actually, are we able to use that in Canada?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the chemical was approved by the Canadian government. It's also received the Presidential Green Chemistry Challenge Award in the States. I've been in contact with the manufacturer and they're hoping to be able to release the product in Canada next year. It has basically been a game changer in the US. The US government has endorsed it for use at all its historic sites. So it's something that I think staff should look more closely at as a possible tool we can use to fight termites in our community. So what I'd like to suggest is that they consider using this product as possible termite control management program for Center Wellington.
So you're putting forward the thought that staff look into this product, and then the second part of that is to spend 1.2 million over 12 years, 100,000 each year.
Yeah, so what I looked at is basically this product, which is a bait and system similar to Dr. Miles. The termites are attracted to the bait, they carry it back to the colony and kill the colony. I looked at average costs for treatment from $1,300 to $3,600. I went with an average of $2,500 and figured if you were to treat 40 properties per year, that'd be roughly 100,000. So if we're looking at 480 properties, it stretches out a number of years. So I'm just saying, currently we've identified 60,000 for 4 years. I'm saying we're not even going to deal with the problem. It's just money that's being wasted. If we really want to do something, we have to look at something more significant and extend it out further.
Okay, thanks, Councillor McCray. Comments about that, Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure who's in charge of this file, but we got a report from Dr. Miles. We had put $60,000 a year for 5 years away. It was my understanding, the last report was he didn't want to go any further. He was ready to retire, and the problem was bigger than he thought. So I just want to be clear, we're not still paying him $60,000 a year. Can somebody answer that question for me?
Brett?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Linton. We identified the $60,000 per year as an estimate based on what one of our neighboring municipalities had put in for termite management. That was all budgeted first in 2021 before Dr. Miles produced his survey. We did not pay for the survey work out of that money. So the 60,000 that we budgeted in 2021, because Dr. Miles didn't proceed or didn't wish to conduct the further work beyond the survey because of the amount of work involved, that money is largely unspent. And we are now working with other people with expertise in termite to say what are our options for what we do next. Dr. Miles was planning an eradication program. His estimated cost based on the number of properties with termites that we had, the $60,000 per year would need to have been increased in order to achieve what Dr. Miles hopes to achieve, which is to largely eradicate termites. So we are working with other vendors to try to come up with a better estimate or a different program that we can recommend to council. It's just there's not very many people in the industry, and it's difficult to come up with a program that's not going to be very costly if we want to do the same thing that Dr. Miles did. We are planning on having a local person with some expertise in termites come to council at the end of October to be able to answer some of your technical questions about the termite treatment options and chemicals in a more educated way than I can do.
Councillor Dunsmore, following?
So just to clarify it in my mind, Brett, please. You were working with somebody, that your plan is to have them come in October to bring a report to council with numbers attached to it for this budget, so that we know what we're doing, and then we can approve it or deny it based on the budget numbers for the 2022 budget. Is that correct?
No, in October, they'll come with options and be able to answer your questions about what different treatment chemicals are available and what different things that he believes that a private termite treatment firm is able to provide. For the long term, we're going to have to come up with, we're likely have to find vendors, and we may have to go through an RFP process, or we choose a single vendor. But we think council's got questions about the chemicals and what can be done. And what I think we've learned is that maybe some things that Dr. Miles could or have used. Councillor McCrae's question today is sort of a new one about a new chemical that he's found. We don't have staff who are trained and educated in termites. It's not, it's not something that we're legislated to do. And so we're going to bring forward an expert that hopefully can answer council's question in a better way than I can. And then we'll have to go forward after that. But
Okay.
the 60,000 that was budgeted in 2021 has not been spent.
Okay, so we still have the 60 from 2021 and we did 5 years. So we still have that money allocated for this project. So when we get this plan, we can put that towards it and maybe have to come up with something else. But I appreciate that. And I don't have the expertise in it either. And I just want to make sure it doesn't get dropped off the budget. It doesn't get dropped off our agenda, but we need to make sure we do it properly and carefully.
Brett, could Councillor McCrae's thought and process and chemical be sent to this expert prior to him coming so he can speak to it and help council understand it from his perspective?
Certainly. Yeah, we'll do that.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. The Centricom product that Ian has referred to has been available in Canada, not available, but approved in Canada since 2017. And it was the one that I talked to Dr. Miles about a year ago. It was at that time, the company was forecasting they would have it available in Canada in November of last year, but it has been deferred because of COVID, apparently, is what I've been told. But so I mean, it's just a matter of getting it into Canada. The company they've gone through all of the expense of getting it approved through the Canadian government. So they're certainly planning on bringing it to Canada. Paul Velson is already very familiar with it. So while he's familiar with the fact that it's coming and what it is, as Dr. Miles was, but it just isn't here yet. But I think from what I understand, the vendor you're discussing with, Brett, has worked with the building department to put together a 1 year and a 5 year plan. And so if Centricom is included in that plan, he can probably give us better accurate information on what it's going to cost in Canada to do it. Suggestion. I don't know that for us to say $100,000 now, I think is just pulling a number out of the air because we don't really have any proof of that. So I do know that Paul is certainly $60,000 is far from what we need.
Just as we're talking about this, Mark or Dan, can you remind me what a 1% increase in taxation is per year? Dan?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Linton. 1% is approximately $150,000.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McCrae. Ian, I agree with you completely. With one exception, I wonder, Ian, if we need to hit the problem harder in the earlier years, 30 or 40 or 50 properties a year when there's 500 or so is only scratching the surface. I'd like to see us hit the problem more aggressively in the early years with the goal of eradication. I fear, Ian, that if we did 40 a year, solve the problem in one house, and 3, 4, 5 years later, they may return to the very same house. So I guess I'm wondering, Dan, is there a way we could, for budgetary purposes, fund it more aggressively in the early years and perhaps have it taper off in the later years, over 10 years?
Andy?
Pending the,
Yeah, thank you, through Mayor Linton. Any dollars that we add to the budget have to be either other projects reduced, or we have to look at additional taxes to increase the revenue stream to pay for those programs. So it's up to council. If you're taking money from to add to one project, to delete it or defer it from others, or look to an additional tax increase.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'd like to thank the CAO for mentioning that. That's correct. I'd like to thank Ian for bringing this forward and suggesting that we look at this and attack this termite problem. I get a lot of feedback from citizens that this is important to them. But the budget problem is that I believe that we could, if we as a council believe this is a real problem, and then address it and perhaps address it aggressively, we do need to look at other programs. We had a presentation on emerald ash borer. A lot of those trees are cut down. We perhaps could take from those budgets to address this other problem. That's sort of how you do budgeting. And I believe that we wouldn't have to add taxes if we did the budgeting process and saw where we could take some funds. But I think the preliminary thing is that we need to have a timeline when we could execute a plan, and not just throw money each year that also doesn't get spent, and then added on the budget for the next year. So we need to have a plan and an execution for a significant problem in our community, and then look at the budget and see accordingly. But at the present time, I'm for adding and addressing this problem in our community, adding monies to that, but also finding other resources, as the CAO said.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I agree with everything that the various councillors have said. What I'd like to suggest is that we hold off agreeing to the termite management program, any additional funding, until we hear from the termite expert at the end of October, who can come and explain to us more about the problem we're facing, and also, share with us his opinion or her opinion of, given the fact we got 480 properties, what is it going to take to effectively deal with these termites? What is it going to cost? What is a reasonable time period in which to deal with it? I threw out the number 100,000 based on 40 units. I mean, one could easily, as Councillor Foster said, hit it really hard and go after a lot more properties. That's significantly more money. So it's a matter of understanding what will be the actual cost of, say, using this product, which Councillor McElwain has referred to, as well as the termite experts' guidance on what we're capable of doing, how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. But I think the community is looking to us as its leaders to address this termite problem. And I'm fortunate where I live, I don't have termites, touch wood, but those things are continuing to expand outward, and we need to stop them before more houses are affected.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. One of the things that Dr. Miles and other termite treatment folks have mentioned in the past is that if you're going to try and get rid of termites, you do it at a block at a time. You don't do a house at a time. So how many houses you do in a year will depend upon which block or block of blocks that you decide you're going after. So it's, I think just saying, a specific number of houses is probably not going to work. But once again, if we wait for the expert presentation, he'll probably discuss that with us.
Okay, Mark, next section.
Okay, next section's a small one here, municipal buildings. Dan, I don't know if you can quickly share your screen there. Okay, so there's just a few items there. If there's no questions, we can go on to the next section. Okay. Dan, you want to go to the next page? So next section, fire services. So we do have some items there that staff did want to speak to. And that is all revolving around the items that are in years 2025 to 2027. So this is the new fire hall and so forth. Now, Pat was supposed to speak to this and she's not able to make it today. So I'm not sure who will be speaking to this actually.
I know we have Matt here, and I think he'd love to speak to any questions that council had for him for this section. Questions from council for this section? Okay, go on, Mark.
Okay, health services. So these are all the items, projects anticipated at the various cemeteries. These are all funded from the cemetery expansion reserve, so they have no impact on taxation. Does anybody have any questions on those items?
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
All right. Next section is the capital levy OSIF funded projects. So these are, as the title says there, these are all funded from OSIF money and the dedicated capital levy. There are a couple items in there that are funded from or has contributions from development charges, but this bridge plan has not changed from the September 7th meeting. So it's exactly the same as was brought forward at that point in time. So council did approve that a month ago. So do we go to the next section here, Dan, at this point?
Councillor McElwain?
Thank you. I just, we had a delegation to talk about the 24 WG. I think that's the number. We had questions about it in September, the earlier meeting as well. Just 4.2 million. I mean, that's the same price as the St. David Street Bridge, which it seems like an awful lot for a side road bridge. And our delegate mentioned that because of the proximity to Highway 6, there really isn't a significant difference for emergency services north of that bridge. So I'm wondering if, should that be reviewed? It's just a huge piece of change for a side road bridge, and I'm wondering if we should relook at that one, and particularly if as our delegate said, it was the emergency services from Highway 6 can get there very easily north of the bridge.
Colin, do you have anything to add to the discussion from the other day on this bridge?
Yeah, thanks, Wellington. So this does have environmental assessment approval for the replacement. We do have a council endorsement of the preferred option, which is replacements. So, if council, chooses to change that decision, I think we're familiar with the process to reopen a decision that's already been made by council. But like I said, staff are proceeding with the detailed design and progressing that along this year with the funds approved by council in the 21 budget.
Councillor McCrae?
Thank you, Marilyn. Colin, just related to the first line bridge, the reason it's so expensive is not just due to the bridge itself, but it's all the additional work in building up the approaching road. Due to the fact we've had flooding issues, this is a more significant road redesign as well as a bridge redesign. Is that part of the reasons for the expenses?
Yeah, through Mayor Linton, that's correct. So the structure itself has become slightly larger. We've done some hydraulic modeling of the river system, and just to make sure we're not causing any or creating we want to improve the current situation with the road flooding. So what's happening is the bridge has come up quite a bit, and then with that is the roads, the approaches to the bridge have also been elevated quite significantly. And then we still have a constraint with our road allowance. We're still working within the 20-meter wide road allowance. And so there's some retaining walls and whatnot that need to go along with raising that road profile up about, I believe it's about 2 meters at the structure itself. So we have factoring in the roads and the larger structure is resulting in the higher cost estimate.
Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Marilyn. Just a general comment. I mean, when I look back at the history of all these bridges, these were all built to provide farmer or access for the farmers to get to their fields on both sides of the river. That hasn't changed. What we are seeing is we're seeing more and more farm properties being bought up by larger farming operations, which means that farmers have to get across the river and they need bridges that will support the width and weight of their vehicles. Maybe to others, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal to leave a bridge closed and have them use other roads, but that does cost money and time to have to move this larger farm equipment, which goes at a slower pace down other roads. So I think it's important to the agricultural community that we continue to move ahead and build this bridge.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
All right, next section is Public Works Other. So there is one item here that Colin wanted to speak to, and that is item 303-0299, the Corporate Operations Facility.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and through Mayor Linton. So in 2022, we've shown the additional funds for detailed design. So this is really to get the project shovel ready. So get us through design, site plan approval process. We've got geotechnical studies, surveying to be completed to get the project shovel ready. So that's 22, and then the funds in 23 and 24 were outlined in the June 28th, 2021 report to council, and are taken directly from the implementation plan from that. So that's really looking at phase 1 construction of the new facility, and includes both the garage areas as well as the administrative areas.
Dan, if you could just refresh your memory about how this is being paid for through development charges, primarily in the sales of other lands. I think that would be good context to provide at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Linton. As identified in previous meetings, this project is predominantly growth related. This phase of the project is predominantly growth related. I believe it was either 93% or 94% growth related. With that, that portion of the project was proposed to be debt funded. So the principal and interest payments would be funded through future collection of development charges. The remaining 6 or 7% of the project is proposed to be funded through land sale reserve, so that there would be no impact on taxation or water and wastewater rates for the construction of the operations center.
Thanks, Dan. Questions from Council for Public Works Others? Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, I'm opposed to the corporate operations facilities. And as outlined today, we don't even have a growth strategy or any proposed one to have in the future till 2026. And so I find this is just outrageous that we're spending all this money on a facility, which is just a want instead of a need established by factual data. And so that's just, I want to make that comment, and I probably won't approve this capital forecast because of that.
Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I too have very great concerns about the operations center. I think, Mayor, it's a spurious claim to say we should look at the source of the funding. A dollar spent is a dollar spent, and in this case, we're actually borrowing the money to spend it. It doesn't justify the expense because it's not coming from taxation. So I don't agree, Mayor, that the source of the funding is a justification to spend the money. This is going to saddle us with debt. The project is funded with debt. It has to be paid for with development charges down the line. So in this case, we're leveraging for a project that I don't think we need. And I shudder to think what will happen if the DCs don't materialize. We'll have to, what do we pay the loan back with if there happens to be no DCs down the line, or not as much as we thought? A dollar spent is a dollar spent, whether it comes from your left pocket or your right pocket. I don't agree with it.
Yeah, just a couple of points of clarification, because we do have media and the public on this call. Two things. One, I think the point that I was trying to make is it's not coming out of the left or right pocket of the taxpayer, that it was come out of development charges, which is consistent with the policy of this council that growth pays for growth. I think that is important. I think that is a really critical context, actually. Secondly, I wanted our treasurer to comment on the suggestion that this is going to saddle us with debt, to provide a little bit more context and clarity on that statement that was made by Councillor Foster. Dan?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Linton. This was part of the presentation in introducing the Operations Center to council and the public. We did a debt analysis based on known debt over the 10-year forecast period. Most of it growth related, some of it non-growth related. Just for everybody's interest, municipalities are allowed to have up to 25% of annual revenues in the form of principal and interest payments. That is our debt capacity, 25% of revenues. We're currently at approximately 6 or 7% of revenues, so well below the provincial capacity. The anticipated debt over the forecast period, including the operations center, brings us into the 11 to 12% of revenue perspective. So again, well below the 25% debt capacity, and well within reasonable levels.
Other comments from council? Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, Dan, you've proven the point that we're increasing our debt load for something that hasn't been shown to be comprehensively needed. What is needed is that in the future, with the growth related to growth, is the sewage treatment plants, which will saddle us with more debt on top of this debt. And so what would be the debt load after the sewage treatment plants are in Fergus especially needed to be updated?
Dan?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. The numbers I just referenced, which is increasing debt capacity to 12% of annual revenues, that includes not only the operations center, but that includes the proposed expansion to the Fergus wastewater treatment plant. It includes a third fire station. It includes an additional well within the 10-year forecast and a few other growth-related needs. So That was combining all future known debt needs over the 10-year forecast to arrive at that increased debt capacity number.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Other questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Dan, I thank you for your debt capacity analysis, but what I'm hearing you say, Dan, is that because we have debt capacity, we should use it. Because we can borrow, we ought to borrow. That still doesn't justify the expense, in my view. Here, we've had a lengthy discussion today about not having a growth strategy, and we don't have one. And yet we're using growth as a justification to borrow money to build a garage that we don't need. So I cannot support that, Dan. I have already made my views known. I've already asked questions about cost savings. Colin Baker has told me we're going to pay this loan from savings on the heating bill. None of the above justify the expense. And I maintain that once you spend that dollar, or in this case, $15 million, you can't spend it on something else. So all of the arguments have never justified this expense to me. We have 4 good operation centers. I know they need some work. I stand by my remarks, Mayor. This is going to saddle us with debt, and we can't use the money where it's really needed.
Like termites.
Yeah, there's really no question there. So any other questions, comments from council on this one? Okay, move on, Mark.
All right, rural roads is the next area, and Colin wanted to speak to item 2012-070, 8th line east, side road 14 to side road 10.
Yep, thanks, Mark, and through Mayor Linton. So this is the continuation of improvements to the 8th line. As council will recall, the section between Middlebrook and County Road 18 was completed this year, actually, just completed about a month ago. And this is the kind of the next priority section for the 8th line. So this is actually, there's a project already in 22. So this is from 22, or sorry, from 20 Wellington Road 21 south to side road 10. So that's a section in 22, and then this would be completing the section of 8th line to the southern township boundary with Guelph Aramasa. So again, kind of very similar scope to our rural road projects, pulverization of the existing asphalt, addition and compaction of some new granular materials. We're looking at paving with 100 millimeters thickness, asphalt thickness, and then of course, kind of working on the transitions to driveways, shoulder transitions, and line painting as well, included in the scope of this project.
Thanks, Colin, for that. Questions from council for this section? Okay, go ahead, Mark. Sorry, Mark, are you talking?
Yep, I was muted.
Okay, go start over. start over again.
Yeah, sorry about that. So Colin wanted to speak to 2017-040 East Mill Street, Metcalf to Melville Street.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Not much to add here. We did speak to this in response to the delegation earlier today. So again, just to reiterate, we've updated our asset management plan calculations, which again take that risk calculation, which is looks at the probability of failure times the consequence of failure, and this section of water main is ranked very high, and it's at a very high pressure as well. As a high pressure water main, it's kind of elevation wise kind of low in the system, so it operates at a consistently high pressure. So that is what is coming up quite high priority in terms of replacement. And so like I mentioned earlier, We are planning this as a full reconstruct. So not just coming in and replacing the water main and leaving everything else. We are looking at replacement of storm sewers, sidewalks, some adjustments to the sanitary sewer system likely in that area. And one of the things I would maybe just, would appreciate some discussion or thoughts on is the electrical. Quite often our policy has been when we're in the downtown is to transition the overhead utilities, hydro, Bell, Cogeco, and put them underground, which really tidies up the streetscapes, and aesthetically is really, very pleasing, to tidy up the street and, open up, opportunities for additional street planting and that sort of thing. There's some pretty significant hydro plants, hydro poles, utility wires in that section of street. And so right now that cost estimate doesn't include putting those underground. It's actually just some of our preliminary estimates. We're looking at about an extra $1 million of tax supported dollars to transition all those overhead utilities to underground. And it's a bit of a shared responsibility. We're not just dealing with Center Wellington Hydro as the hydro supplier in that area. There's also Hydro One, poles and primary lines, transformers, all in that area. So right now our estimates don't include that transition. That would be, like I said, about an additional $1 million at this stage, in addition to what's currently shown in the capital forecast.
Any comments, questions from council for roadways urban? Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, Colin, you asked for discussion on the bearing of the hydro lines, and I think that's a great idea, but only if we can find the money from the province and the hydro, because I think if we added $1 million to this, we'd move it out 5 years, and I don't think the residents in that area deserve that. I think they deserve this to be on the docket for as soon as possible. So perhaps this time we just can't do it.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Marilyn. Colin, I'm just curious, related to bearing the utilities, these utilities, thinking of climate change and the fact that we're starting to experience more, what I call it, severe weather events. So for example, freezing rain events. If we were to have more significant freezing rain events, given the type of hydro infrastructure that we have here, if these lines went down, would there be some significant power outages in the community where bearing these utilities would actually provide more protection from future climate events?
Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor McCray, through Mayor Linton. So certainly, with transitioning the primary overhead lines, there'd be to underground, it would be less susceptible to freezing rain events that would knock out or damage kind of exposed utilities above ground. Again, it's not a township decision as to what level of risk the utility provider is willing to accept. From what we understand in discussions with Hydro One, in this case, they don't have any plans to transition any of those lines underground. So we would become kind of the major driver. Our project would become the major driver to go underground if that's the way we would want to proceed. And since that would be if that's the case, then the township would be responsible for those costs. We certainly have had situations from security of supply, the hydro supply. Center Wellington Hydro has worked with us to put primary hydro underground in certain projects, but it comes at a very significant cost. But they did decide that it was they wanted to do that from a security of supply and reduce the risk to their system. Doesn't seem to be the case with Hydro One for this project.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. Colin, for the bearing of utilities, is it possible to separate the, let's say, the physical pre-planning of the, let's say, tubing and the actual transfer of the service, like the electrical services? So let's say when we dug the hole, we have the piping done, and we understand each location might have an outlet that needs to come out, but we don't actually do the service right now. So is there a breakdown of those two parts of the $1 million? Like if we did the tubing now for 200,000 and then the servicing part of getting all the electrical things transferred, that could come at a later date. So is there possible to break that down?
Yeah, great question, Councillor Kittrus. I guess short answer, it would be to transfer, or separate the costs in those two different phases. I think if we went that route, you'd find the significant cost, or the large percentage of the cost, is in the piping or the conduit or duct that is placed. So there'll be large trenches of ductwork. There'll be chambers required where there's overhead transformers, maybe attached to a pole. We'd have to get those either surface mounted or underground. And so quite a bit of the cost would be transferred to the underground. Part of the incentive, I guess, to do it all at once is getting the poles out of the way as well. So once we redesign the street, by removing the hydro poles, it may open up additional parking spaces. We may be able to widen sidewalks in certain areas. So it would, I think, be best to have it all kind of packaged as one. Like, we could certainly separate the costs to show kind of how it's broken out. But in terms of the sequence of events, probably more efficient to do it all at once.
Councillor Kittrus, follow
on? Basically, if you have the hole already dug, isn't that the major part of the expense? So you're already open, and then you just have to price for the conduit and the blocks for the connecting the transformers. Because you're taking the cost that we haven't dug any holes, but with the other work that's being done, the holes will be open, and so then that cost won't be part of it. So isn't that the major part of it? You just said that's a major part of the cost. So what is the conduit part that when the hole's open? I'm just kind of wondering, like, we could save maybe in the future, if we're thinking about it, it would save us a significant amount of money just to pay for the conduit right now.
Anything to add to your original answer, Colin?
No, just to perhaps clarify, yeah, we wouldn't normally excavate a utility trench where we aren't proposing to put one in. So where we're proposing to dig for the municipal services, so the water main and storm sewers, would be within the road, so within the travel portion of the road. Utilities are generally located in the downtown areas under the sidewalk. And so it'd be a significant utility trench that we'd have to excavate kind of below the sidewalk in front of the buildings. And then it becomes transitioning individual businesses and stores and residences from the overhead connections to underground connections, which is another significant undertaking.
Councillor Kittrus?
But I understand that you're already doing the sidewalks for this project. So, like, you're already excavating them or like, that's what I understand. So that's what I'm saying. Like, how much more do you have to do? Like, what's the recommended footage for electrical? It's not water, so it's, you know, you don't need to have 4 feet or below the frost line, do you?
Anything else to add, Colin? I think the answer is our managing director of infrastructure said it'll cost about $1 million extra to do this. So it'll create a significant amount of other work. So I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add to that answer, Colin. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have anything further to add at this time.
Okay, so let's take a bit of a break. We'll break until 3:30 and we'll get back into the next section.
Good for you to call him on that
Okay, it is now 3:30. We'll reconvene this meeting. We're at Mark. If you can take us to storm drainage, that'd be great.
Okay, the next two sections actually are fairly small: storm drainage and structures. Anybody has any questions on those? They're kind of in the middle of the page there. All right.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, and the next section is wastewater, which will probably span a couple of pages.
Any questions, comments from council on wastewater projects? Okay, go ahead, Mark.
All right, next section is waterworks. Do keep in mind a lot of the water wastewater projects do relate back to some urban road projects as a full reconstructions. Waterworks will span a few pages as well.
Any questions on the waterworks portion? Okay, go ahead, Mark.
All right, and then Parks and Recreation. And I think what we can do is we can take Parks and Recreation, all the facility stuff and the grounds. If there's any questions on those.
Okay, facility and grounds for Parks and Rec. Okay, go ahead.
All right, and then last section is the parks. And there's also Parks and Rec other, where there's a couple of projects as well.
Okay, any questions on those last two, Parks and Recreation other? Councillor Kittredge?
Can you explain why we're spending $200,000 on urban forestry to the tune of for the next, and how many years have we already spent on urban forestry? For this 10-year, it'll be $2 million. So how much have we already spent, and why are we spending the $200,000 a year?
I would turn that one over, I think, to Matt Tucker.
Thanks for the question, Councillor Kittredge. Through you, Mayor Linton. I believe next month, Madeleine is going to come with a report to talk about urban forestry and give an update. As far as dollars spent, I was hoping maybe Mark or Dan could help me out with that number. I don't have it at my fingertips.
Mark?
I do have the amount here. It is about $989,000 been spent since 2014.
I do know that we planted 3,313 trees in the past 3 years, so that's one of the outcomes of it. Andy, yep.
Thank you, through Mayor Linton. So Matt, as Matt said, Matthew will be coming with a report highlighting the work that had been done, which includes some of the urban tree policies, as well as the policies working on currently with regards to urban trees and the bylaw that we've talked about, as well as all the emerald ash borer and the tree planting and street trees and pruning. And so he will be speaking to that, as well as what the plans are for the 2022 capital allocations with regards to the trees.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks. To counter, kind of following Councillor Kittredge's question. So I feel like I remember this coming forward when we began this urban forestry we really launched forward when we looked at the emerald ash borer concern. But we do definitely have, you can see it's 200,000 yearly. Could we maybe talk about what the long term, like it seems like we've layered in this 200,000. We now have Matt full-time. Are his wages in there? Because I don't think he's he's an employee, not a capital project. So I'd really like to know what our long-term plans are, because it's year over year over year at 200,000. It's definitely gonna continue to layer on. Thanks.
Yeah, Andy?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Linton. So Matthew, although they're full-time, him and the project coordinators do charge their time to the various capital projects. So there are some salary costs within that dollars whenever he's working on the trees. When he's working on other capital projects, he charges his time there. But we'll make sure that Matthew speaks to the longer term as well with regards to urban forestry in the report coming forward.
Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Andy, you're saying that the total cost for the urban forestry is also wages outside of this for the urban forestry? So it's actually higher? Is that what you're saying?
No, through you, Mayor Linton, the salary is included in the numbers that Mark spoke about. So we have several capital project positions in the urban forester that charge their time to the capital project instead of to the operating budget.
Any other questions for Parks and Recreation other? Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Mayor. It's for you again, Matt. There's a line item 2020-05. Oh, where is it here? With the trails and pathways, and I'm trying to find it again, but active transportation is 5050550, neighborhood interconnections. That's what I was looking for. Just a follow-up question to previous years is, has the interconnection from Salem Elementary been completed, or is it in the plan for next year? Do you know?
Matt?
Good question, Councillor McElwain. Through you, Mayor, we're currently working on that plan. Along with Matthew's update on urban forestry, he's going to be giving an update as well with this line item as well next month.
That corner up there is becoming more and more dangerous as traffic on Side Road 15 increases. So getting that interconnection would be very useful.
I agree.
Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. On the dedicated youth space, it states 2010 is when that is first, and we're not doing anything for till 2031, which is like 20 years. So I thought it was a priority on our strategic plan. And so I'm just wondering why it's out so far. And I'm just wondering either why do we even have it, or why are we, why is it even part of the capital budget forecast if it was 2010 and we haven't done anything and we're not planning on doing for 10 years. So I'm just wondering whether we should just remove it.
Andy?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. This does speak to the Parks and Rec master plan. So the previous dedicated youth facility was identified in the previous master plan. And then through the public engagement and that through the new master plan that Matt brought to council just a few years ago, it was still identified, but not as a higher priority, given some of the other priorities that were to be accomplished. So the master plan now speaks to it saying still needing to keep it on the horizon, but it's not one of the higher priorities at this point in time, given some of the other facilities that are being established in the community.
And I think that's a really good point, Andy. Just because this item for a facility is out there doesn't mean that we haven't been very, very active when it comes to youth and what we're doing with youth. And I know Councillor Dunsmore is pretty involved in a lot of the youth and the hub and what we're doing on the integrated youth services network and partnership with Big Brothers Big Sisters and a few other organizations in the county. Did you want to speak a little bit to that, Councillor Dunsmore? Because I don't want people to get the sense that we're not doing anything when it comes to youth in our community.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly, through you. And just for to correct you, because I know the change is very recent, Integrated Youth Services Network is now referred to as the Grove. And through the Grove and the hubs and the Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and all the private sector not-for-profit partners, that we're developing a place for youth in this community. And I think it's important. We've got this. It was identified. It was moved out because it wasn't a high priority. But I see a huge opportunity here now for us to work in private-public cooperation and see if we can't come up with youth facilities that way. So I'm glad that we used a placeholder here to keep it on council's docket so that we can continue to discuss it. And I would encourage staff to look at those private-public partnerships that can actually make this happen a little bit quicker.
Anything else from council? Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just on that item, the dedicated. This is about a youth space. So this is about a building or a structure, is it not? And is that, can that be DC charges related, or can somebody answer that?
Dan or Mark? Mark?
Thank you, Mayor. It was in the, or it is in the DC study, and it's 100% eligible for DCs.
Thanks, Mark. Follow on, Councillor Kittredge.
If thank you, Mayor. If this is part of the DCs, and therefore we've said that it's not a priority, it would seem to me that it is an actual priority, and it should be done much sooner. And we should be looking at the DCs and spending the money on this to do something for youth. To sort of have this on a placeholder when it's 100% funded by DC charges seems like we actually do not care to make a space for the youth and to have a plan. So I think we need to change that. I think that's it should be a priority actually for this community.
First thing I want, Dan or Mark, do you want to explain DCs and how we have to save up DCs in order to be able to use them in the future? Just because it's going to be part of a DC, potential DC funded project doesn't mean we have access to that money right now. Do you want to, does one of you want to speak about that to council? Dan?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Yeah, so typically capital projects have to occur in advance of growth. So a lot of municipalities struggle with DC cash flow, where you have to build the roads or the other related capital infrastructure to accommodate growth before the growth actually happens. So, and council can relate back to the June pre-budget meeting we had, where we had basically decided from a cash flow perspective around $1.7 million in DCs were going to be shown annually in the forecast for growth related capital projects. So the senior team has gone through that exercise of allocating development charges to the various years of the 10-year forecast. And it is a difficult process to go through, given that there's such a huge demand for growth related projects and very little DC cash flow to go around. And that's where we've gone through it year by year at a senior team level and tried to decide where specific capital projects fit in based on priority and need. But like I said earlier, it's a matter of doing the infrastructure first, and the growth happens later, and that puts a lot of strain on municipalities.
Mr. Dunsmore?
Yeah, I'm all for making it a priority, but I think with the stuff that's gone on in our community related to the youth, I would like to get that established, get our youth using that, and then get our youth's opinion of what's needed moving forward so that we build something that is beneficial to our youth. And I think we need to do some studies with them and get their input, and then we'll know exactly what it is, and then we can put the money to it.
Councillor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Dan for explaining the DC charges and how we do it. And it just reinforces that we are willing to borrow millions of dollars to do an operation facility that basically benefits the staff and what they would want. But a youth space that we've had on the books for since 2010, there is no plan at all. Even though it's kept there as a priority, it keeps being thrown up, into the future, and nothing is done. And so I think that in terms of studying more what the youth want, we've done studies. We had a youth committees established that was priority by the mayor, but nothing was done. In terms, I think we've had feedback from the youth, and I think that we need to sort of decide, are we going to do anything for the youth in the future in Center Wellington, and establish a space, safe space for them. And we can see that we can borrow money for the operations facilities, we can borrow money for all sorts of things, but this is a priority that we have decided is not a priority.
Any other comments, questions from council? Councillor Dunsmore?
Well, I would like to just clarify some of Councillor Kittrus's remarks that we're not making youth a priority. And, last week we heard a lot about not listening to what the public has to say. And I believe you heard that we had a recreation plan, a long-term strategic plan. And this was identified by the citizens in the lead up to that plan and the consultations, that it was a priority, but not an immediate priority. So staff listened to them and moved it out. So those of us who are in that space are working diligently with the youth and trying to help them. The remark that the mayor started a youth group, a youth committee, and pushed it aside is more a result of COVID than anything else. And I just didn't want to leave that lasting impression that we're somehow not doing anything for the youth, because I know the youth in this community are engaged. I talk to them on a regular basis, and I don't want people left with that image.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dunsmore. And just to make council aware, our communications coordinator, Kendra Martin, is working with the youth in the high school, and we'll get something up and going now that they're back in school. We had a really great youth committee prior to COVID, and now that we're being able to get back together, you're going to hear and see more from them because they are an important part of this township, and we want to make sure that we're making decisions and making investments in ways that our next generation can picture themselves being part of this community, and that is very much still ongoing. So that's it. For anything else that you want to add, Mark?
Nope.
Okay, I'm going to read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve the inclusion of the 10-year capital forecast as outlined in Report COR 2021-63, dated October 4th, 2021, in the draft 2022 budget. Can I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor Kittrus. You're seconding that?
I'd like a recorded vote, please.
Okay. Can I get a seconder for that recommendation, please? Councillor McCray. And I'll turn it over to our clerk to do a recorded vote.
Through you. Councillor Van Leeuwen,
Yes.
Councillor Foster, Councillor
No.
McElwain,
No.
Councillor McCray,
Yes.
Councillor Kittredge,
No.
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
Yes.
Yes.
That is carried.
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Council. And now we move on to 6.2, our staffing strategy, and turn it over to our Chief Administrative Officer, Andy Goldie.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. During last year's budget process, Councillor Kittredge proposed a notice of motion requesting that staff develop a staffing recommendation business plan to obtain approval for a new employment position. Councillor Kittredge listed 11 requirements that he wanted addressed. Many of these requirements are administrative in nature. Councillor Kittredge's notice of motion was deferred, and a motion was approved that the motion be deferred to the CAO to bring back a report outlining the current process for proposing new hires. As requested by council, this report before you today outlines the current administrative process staff go through in preparing our annual staffing strategy for the budget process. In speaking with many other municipalities, our process is very similar, if not identical, to their administrative process and their council approvals for new staff positions through the budget process. The staffing requirements of an organization are the CAO's responsibility, and the funding approvals are the policy part for council. Councillor Kittredge has already advised by email today to staff and council that the report does not satisfy the numerous administrative questions that he wants addressed. This is not what council directed me as CAO to report back on. As council is aware, the township continues to grow with new residential areas, new businesses. We have new legislation and regulations being put forth down us by the upper levels of government that we must meet. And increased expectations by our residents are all impacting our servicing and staffing requirements to provide those services. These services are provided primarily by township employees. In the report, we identify several objectives for our staffing strategy, which I will speak to just a couple here. To maintain our current service levels in our growing economy, to align staffing increases resources with core municipal streets that meet our core strategic objectives, align timing and cost with related revenue sources, including tax assessment growth, user fees, and partnerships. And there are 4 others identified in the report. Staffing levels from various organizations to organizations, including range of services, contracting out of services, levels and services. And in the report, I speak to additional things that are different from organization to organization with municipalities and the types of services they provide, but they all have an impact with regards to the overall operations or our services. As can be seen in the attached benchmarking of the FIRs from 2019, Center Wellington is operating on a very lean staffing resourcing model in comparison to other municipalities. And yet we are growing quicker than many of those other municipalities. Data for the comparison is in the form of the 2019 financial information provided by each municipality. And the reason we use the 2019 data is because the 2020 reporting from the various municipalities has been severely impacted by COVID. And so therefore, apples to apples comparisons were far more challenging. In regards to our administrative process, annually, our senior management team look at each department to identify current service level gaps, new service that are to be provided to our community that are approved by council, services to meet our new growth areas, including snow plowing, park maintenance, sidewalk plowing, maintenance across the area, including trails. We also have to look at new legislative requirements and timing and requirements for our water, wastewater, and more regulated operations. Staff also look at our council strategic plan, priority actions, and this is what we as staff see as our policy direction from the council, that is the strategic priorities that they want to have implemented, and it is our job as staff to put the resources in place to ensure that we meet those priorities. And we also look at the council approved master plan recommendations and timing with regards to allocating those in our budgets from a capital component, but also needing to look at that as those increases also demand additional resourcing for us to look after those operations. This council approved the work sets out in those various documents, and these are the justifications for the proposed staffing resources. If council wishes to stop doing something or delaying projects, then that is for council's decision. Staff analyze existing staff levels to meet their workload and review resources needed to implement council's direction. As per the KPMG servicing review, staff speak with our local municipalities throughout the year regarding possible shared resources, and we've been successful through those over the last several years, and we'll continue to look at those resources and sharing in the future. Staff then prepare a proposed resourcing for year 1, 2, 3, and 4 and beyond to meet the council approved actions, with realistically years 1 being the more detailed and more specific, and years 2, 3, and 4 and beyond more as proposals based on what we believe will be coming in the future. But those may change slightly as we don't all have a crystal ball of what exactly is going to be happening 5 years down the road. Then, as part of the process, preliminary job descriptions are prepared and fully costed, including salary, hourly, and benefits. All the proposed staff resources are then reviewed based on several factors, and the list is identified in page 3 of your report. I'm not going to get into each specific of these, but again, they speak to the various rationale and justification for each of the proposed positions. From this evaluation, staff then create the administrative staffing per list proposed to council as part of the annual budget. And that is the shortened version of the how we go through it each year. And as I mentioned, we've spoken to several municipalities, and in many cases, the process that we go through is a more extensive process and to rationalize those supports. So in speaking to council's request, that is the outline of the existing administrative proposal process. So I'm happy to take any questions with regards to that.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for going through this process in detail. Thanks for including the comparatives. That helps a lot, and the justification for some of the 2022 recommendations here when it comes to staffing. Questions from council. Start with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Andy, for your report. And what I heard you say, Andy, is you need more staff because we're growing, yet earlier in the meeting you didn't answer my question about a formal growth strategy. So the left hand is not corresponding with the right hand here. Earlier in this meeting, we're going to borrow $15 million for a works garage that I don't think we need. And probably it's to house some of the staff we don't need. I'm not in favor of approving these hirings. Where for 8 to 10 years, we've been in a pattern of more spending, more taxing, more borrowing, and more hiring. I won't support this, Andy. You've never proven the justification for the hiring. You've continued to build your empire, and I won't be voting yes to this.
I'd like to caution Councillor Foster with your choice of words. That last sentence that you made was very unparliamentary, and I would like you to retract that statement. There's no truth to it, and there's no justification for saying that our CAO is building an empire, and that's not the kind of terms that we use in respectful council debate. Can you please retract that?
No, Mayor, I won't be retracting that statement. That is my opinion, and that is the opinion of my constituents. We're building an empire and taxing and spending. No.
Okay, that's a warning for you, Councillor Foster, of the use of unparliamentary language. That is not the way we do debate here at Center Wellington. That's the first warning for you. Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks, Mayor, and through you. No, I'm glad to receive this report, especially when we get into the staffing positions. I think it's important also for us to recognize that some are from the wastewater aspect, and I like that you broke them out. However, I do feel like there is some room for us to continue to have a conversation about how we deal with this, with our staffing and what we bring forward. But most of this is what we would call administrative work, and we need to. But I think that some of the information can be brought forward. But one thing I do not want to do is dig right into this at this time. But because we're going to be looking at a new CAO moving forward, so I'm satisfied with the report that I received moving forward. And we also see when we talk about just because we have no growth plan, we clearly have increased growth, not only because of more housing, but also you see the assessment growth rising. So there is a truth and a reality to what's happening, but we do need to finish those plans as well. So I look forward to getting that plan done, but we need to close a budget and get to work and keep the township running smoothly. So this is quite reasonable what I see here today. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a couple of comments. I mean, what you have in the plan is reasonable. Andy made a comment that we're low in our cost of staffing, and I object to that a little bit, I must say, because if I look at the comparators, particularly in the other category, if we take out the two counties, we're high compared to the rest, and elsewhere we're high compared to many. So we're no better than middle of the road, very honestly. And when we look at the percentage of gross expenditure as tax supported operating budget, yes, we're down lower now than we were in 2014, but that's mainly because our operating budget has gone way up, mainly because of the bridge levy. So we're not doing great at all. But on the other hand, the positions that you have identified, I believe, are justified. So that's it.
Councillor Kittrus.
Thank you, Mayor. As I indicated, I thought that Racine would be making some contributions to this staffing plan, since he is the actual the HR expert. And so I'm sure I'd like to hear from him about what exactly the notice of motion being not followed, and in the sense of we don't just compare to other communities like we compare to our neighbors. Oh, there's the same number of people in this household, so we should have the same number of cars that our neighbor has. That's basically, it's done by demographics, the comparisons, and they just don't have any foundation in having a plan based on a growth strategy, which we don't have for new positions, and we don't have a staffing strategy either. And so I think that this has not been fulfilled. I think that adding employees without the strategy, it is, as I said before, it's not just an operational aspect, it is a budgetary. And that's why I made this notice of motion that at budget time, we would have a justification for having these new positions. Not that the basic of justification is trust us, blind trust us. We know, you don't know, but we're asking for money. And so the business plan for each position and the metrics of how you got that is fundamental to the staffing policy. And I don't see that here. And so I think I'd like a recorded vote for this. There's really two parts to this. One is for the policy and one is for the positions in this motion. And I'd like them to be separated. And then we vote on each one separately. And that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, I have no problem with separating those two pieces out, Councillor Kitcher. So we will vote on them separately, and we'll have a recorded vote for both, just to be safe. As far as I want to make it clear that we don't need staff to respond to the first part of as far as the process, the notice of motion goes. Andy already explained how the process was followed appropriately when it comes to your motion, Councillor Kittrus, and what was deferred and what was presented here is exactly what Council provided direction for. So there's no more action required on that. Rashid, if you want to comment on anything here as a new manager of HR, I'm more than welcome to have you comment on what was presented today.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Linton. So, and I appreciate Councillor Kittrus's notice of motion. I read it all, so thank you very much, and thanks for addressing that email to me. And I understand there were questions about the process we take and how it's explained. So the CEO had taken my input as well for me to look at, what he's presented back to your notice of motion. I think it answers all the questions there. So I'm not going to focus on that response because I can tell you that there's legislative requirements, there's different areas in position development. There are different steps an organization takes to come to that. Councils and the boards and the governing tables, you set policy and you let us know that, okay, here's a formula or here's a process, how should you arrive to creation of FTEs. So FTEs are created according to those set parameters, what the policymakers can actually set up. They can write those up and they can say, hey, with growth, if this plus that occurs, you can actually have this much money out of our resources to create FTEs. And don't bring this administrative detail to us because we don't want to know if you are hiring a janitorial staff member or equipment operator or executive. So those decisions are left to CAO. That's why you hire CAOs who are supposed to run the administration. That's how I see a council and administration's role. As to these positions, the second part, Mayor Linton, of this report, I looked at these and one of those is a health and safety position. If I'll just give you an example, the vulnerabilities, and this is again a position which I have put forward, that this is a position where we are pretty vulnerable to see we do not have a central health and safety function. I am more concerned about having an accident or somebody losing their life or limb while working, and then we are all responsible for not having a health and safety function. So this is how much work behind scenes occurs to create an FTE and request a new position, because we have to figure out what process we go through and what are the objectives we are trying to meet. Definitely there's learnings. I'm learning a lot here for sure, that how we can provide what the council is asking for, and also running the administration's duties as diligently as we can. So that separation needs to exist. So I would recommend that we definitely in future start looking at this, that as policy, there's a formula. For example, compensation philosophy, Councillor Kittredge. So you know that you're a 50th percentile employer. This is how much you want to pay, and that attracts certain kind of people to come and work for this organization. So that's a policy statement that we are 50th percentile employer. You can also have a policy on, okay, growth, and this much growth can pay for this many positions. So in future, if that becomes a policy statement, you don't have to look at the strategy. You're not asking for strategy, you're actually asking for business plan of each area with every position, job description, duties, and everything to come to council. If you see that as being your position, then council needs to direct accordingly that you have taken over the administration's role and responsibilities to do that work yourselves. I'm just going to stop there if there are any questions.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, first off, I'm happy with the report, Andy. I think it was thorough, and I think it's given us the information we need. I've often wondered why we didn't have a health and safety person, and I'm glad that we do that now. And Rashid, I'm happy that you commented on that to bring that to the forefront. And I would like to just ask you a question for clarification, because I've heard it pronounced many different ways. Could you please give us how you like your name to be said? I'm under the impression it's Rashid. And if it is, great. And if it's not, please correct me.
Rashid?
Thank you. Through Mayor Linton, and thank you, Councillor Dunsmore. So it's been pronounced many different ways and over many councils. So I can tell you that I'm used to everything, but it's Rashid. So that's how my mama calls me. If you can say that, great. If you can't pronounce it, I'm still okay with you guys.
Thank you, Rashid.
Thank you.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. And thank you, Rashid, for your explanations regarding HR policies. I agree with the staffing strategy, and I consider the proposed hires as reasonable. And I appreciate the need for a dedicated health and safety officer. I used to do that in a previous life, and it's pretty time consuming.
Any additional comments, questions from council? Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank Rashid for his explanation, but I'd like to ask, so do we have a policy? And will that be, and if we do, can I see that policy and how that's done? And if not, then I would like to have the recommendation that we develop the policy for staffing, because that's exactly what I did want, because as you outlined, it is a template and it's an understanding for either the board of directors or the elected council to understand how these decisions are made and how it is done. So can you answer that, please?
Yeah, I don't know if this is for Rashid or if it's for Andy at this point. I think Rashid can answer this one. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, so our council needs to definitely inform us with a policy. I'm going to tell you how. So we need to create the policy which actually sets the compensation philosophy of this council, how you want to pay out for future, employees of this corporation. You also want to set up a policy in future of this hiring principles and what are the rules, and that needs to be provided to administration. So willing to work on that. What is existing right now is this staffing strategy and these conversations which are presented to you, and they've been there for years. Andy can correct me if Andy, I misspeak. But I can, looking at all the documentation, and when I read the previous years when I was joining this job, I can tell you I was happy with what I saw. So how the positions are presented to council and the background information provided and how you approve those. And all this work which is done behind scenes, which you did not see or do not see, is administration's work. So we go to a job evaluation committee, we actually rank, we write job descriptions, we review that. We go to consultants, we actually do the market research. So all that work is done. I can definitely see a need for more clarity. And while working here, I'll be recommending that to the administration here and to council, that let's once for all just, write a policy which you can once approve. And then also I would recommend not to be asking for each position's approval, because that's not the board's work and duty. You hire your CEO or CAO to do that work.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Dunsmore?
So Rashid, if we want to have that policy, that would be a good question for the next CAO candidate that we're bringing forward, correct?
Through Mayor Linton. So Councillor Dunsmore, absolutely. So the next CAO can look at all this, all the work that's done already, and they can work with us and present to council. That'd be a very good timing. Yeah.
Okay, I will read both resolutions and we'll do a recorded vote for each. The first recommendation is that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington receive this report on the township staffing strategy as outlined in CAO 2021-010 dated October 4th, 2021 as information. Mover for that? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray, and I'll turn it over to Carrie to do the recorded vote for that recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Van Leeuwen,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
No.
Councillor McElwain,
No.
Councillor McCray,
Yes.
Councillor Kittredge,
No.
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
Yes.
No, they admitted that it wasn't there.
Carrie.
Councillor Kittredge, can you just mute yourself, please? The second piece of the recommendation is that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington directs staff to include the 2022 proposed staffing positions as outlined in report CAO 2021-10 dated October 4th, 2021 in the 2022 draft budget. Have a mover for that, please. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. And I'll turn it to Carrie for the recorded vote.
Councillor Van Leeuwen,
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
No.
Councillor McElwain,
Yes.
Councillor McCray,
Yes.
Councillor Kittredge,
No.
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
Yes.
That carries.
Okay, thanks Council for that discussion on the staffing strategy. Move to the last item on our agenda, 6.3, update on operating and capital inflation, and report from our Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Dan.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just going to quickly share my screen here and go through some of the charts in my report. This is an update to the inflationary discussion we had at the June pre-budget meeting. At the time, we had indicated that inflation levels were on the rise, and we were hoping at some point that they would level off and start to decline back to normal levels. This is an update of the consumer price index year over year since 2011. When we met in June, this was sitting at a 3.3% year over year increase for 2021. It is now up to 4% year over year increase. So we're still seeing inflation rising over time. And we have 3 months left until we start the new budget year and start looking at tendering and quotations and so forth. So this is going to potentially apply some more pressure to our operating budget, given that CPI, this is looking at CPI, which is more of an operation related inflation. This is the monthly year over year increase of CPI. So the 4% is showing year over year as of August. So August 2020 to August 2021. And you can see the significant increase in CPI since about April of 2020 and how it gradually started increasing, but by February of this year, really increased. So we're, like I said earlier, we're in a position where CPI continues to increase, and that's going to put additional pressures on our spending in 2021. The last graph is the non-residential building construction price index. So this is the capital measure that we use to refer to in our budget process. This has gone up significantly. It was a 3.1% increase as of June. It has gone up to 7.7% increase. We knew in June that we were on the precipice of a major increase in capital inflation, just given the prices we were seeing in day-to-day operations, but it's gone up significantly to 7.7%. Again, we hope this declines over time so that when we get into the 2020 construction season, it doesn't have as much of an impact, but this could potentially raise some budget pressures in approving tenders and proposals next year. The last piece I want to draw your attention to is the weighted index that we looked at in June. This combines the operating inflation and capital inflation to our total operating budget from year to year. It is now calculating out at 5%. So based on the blended operating and capital impacts of our budget, we're looking at a year over year increase of 5%, which means things we were buying a year ago now cost approximately 5% more on average. We do have exceptions to that. Some things come in less, some things like insurance and price of gasoline come in more. We are just notified by our insurance providers that we're probably looking at a 12 to 15% increase in insurance for next year. So that's something that we need to be mindful of in setting the 2022 budget. But comparing the 5% to the 2.4% direction we received from council back in June, I guess my conclusion is it's going to put a lot of pressure on staff to come in at 2.4% or less. And that is the direction that we have received from council, and we're working on that. But we just felt that this was important information for council to have at this point in time in the budget process.
Thanks very much, Dan. Again, that was just for council's information to provide some context, and Dan felt that was important to bring to council's attention more accurate inflation numbers. Any questions for clarification from council at this point? Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. Dan, there's been a lot of discussion in the news that perhaps inflation is just transitory. What's your views on that? Like, do you think that it is just transitionatory, or will it be actually increasing considering some other factors? That's one question. The second one is, will you be, if next month, have another month before the budget actually gets printed, if it continues at the pace that it is, will you be coming forward with council on any assorted cuts that we might have to do to hit the target of 2.4?
Dan?
Thank you, Councillor Kittredge. Through Mayor Linton, your first question, we've been involved in a lot of discussions with various financial institutions on forecasting inflation, and everybody agrees that eventually inflation will come back down to normal levels. I believe the goal is to try to keep inflation in and around 2%. But what financial institutions are struggling with is how long will it take to come down to 2%? If that doesn't happen in 2022 and it's more of a decrease that happens in 2023, then like I said earlier, that's going to put some strain on the township from a spending perspective in the next year. So in terms of your second question, yes, as we have in the last few budgets, we will show council what the initial budget as requested by staff has come in at, and the related reductions that staff had prepared to come down to the 2.4%. So that is something we provided over the last couple of budgets, and we'll continue to do that in this budget so that council has a very clear and transparent picture of how we got down to the council direction of 2.4%.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for that information. That's all we have for agenda today. So I have a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Kittredge, second by Councillor Dunsmore. All in favor? And we're adjourned. Thanks very much, Dan, Mark, and the team here for bringing all that information to us. We have a really great staff, and every year it astounds me how much of a handle we have on our operations. So thanks for quarterbacking our day today, and thanks to all council for the good discussion. Have a good rest of the evening.